Welcome back to another story on Gringotts Hub. This time, we're bringing you, what if Harry claimed Gryffindor-Slytherin-Merlin Lordships and forced the entire Malfoy-Lestrange family to kneel? Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Inheritance. The letter arrived at 4, Privet Drive at precisely midnight. Not by owl. Not slipped under the door by some ministry functionary with ink-stained fingers and a nervous tick. It appeared on Harry's pillow in a shimmer of gold light that woke him from a dead sleep, and Harry Potter, who had spent 6 years training his body to respond to threats before his eyes were fully open, had his wand in hand before the light had finished fading. He stared at it. A heavy envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax in 3 colors, gold, green, and deep, bruised purple, each pressed with a different crest. The Gryffindor lion. The Slytherin serpent. And in the center, a crest he almost didn't recognize, a design so old it looked like it had been carved before language was fully decided, a hand open to the sky, a star above it, a root below. The seal of Merlin's house. Harry sat up slowly. Outside, Privet Drive was absolutely silent. Not even the Dursleys' refrigerator hummed. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. He broke the seal. The parchment inside unfolded itself, 3 sheets becoming 6 becoming 9, covered in script so small it should have been unreadable. Instead, the moment his eyes landed on the first line, the words rose and expanded, as if they'd been waiting for precisely him. To Harry James Potter, acknowledged scion and sole surviving heir of the ancient and noble house of Potter, the ancient and most noble house of Gryffindor, the ancient and most noble house of Slytherin, and the ancient and sovereign house of Merlin, greetings. Your presence is required at Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, at the hour of your choosing on this, the morning of your 17th birthday. Come alone. Come prepared. What you inherit today cannot be undone. No signature. None was needed. Harry read it again. Then a third time. Then he set it down on the bedspread and sat very still for about 30 seconds, which was the longest he'd ever been able to hold absolute stillness in his life. Then he got dressed. He was at the Leaky Cauldron before 4 in the morning. The landlord, Tom, was the only one awake, and he nearly dropped a glass when Harry walked through the door, messy-haired and purposeful, a rucksack over one shoulder and his wand already out of his sleeve. Mr. Potter. Tom managed. It's barely, I know, Harry said pleasantly. Morning, Tom. Can I wait here until Gringotts opens? Tom blinked at him. The boy standing in his doorway didn't look like the pale, quietly battered teenager who'd passed through every year on the way to Hogwarts. He looked like someone who'd made a decision and was done reconsidering it. Tom, who had been in the business of reading people for 40 years, quietly put the kettle on and didn't ask any more questions. Harry sat in the corner booth and read the letter 4 more times over tea, and by the time the watery grey London light had started pressing through the windows, he had gotten himself to the place he needed to be. Not calm, that wasn't the right word. Settled. The way he felt before a Quidditch match that actually mattered. The way he'd felt in the graveyard after Voldemort touched him and he hadn't screamed. Whatever was waiting for him in that bank, he was walking in on his own terms. The goblin at the first desk didn't look up when Harry entered Gringotts at 7:45. The bank was barely open, the marble corridors still full of that particular morning emptiness that made footsteps sound louder than they should. Harry walked to the desk and waited. Name, the goblin said, still not looking up. Harry Potter. The goblin's quill stopped. Just for a fraction of a second, so brief a human would have missed it, and then he set the quill down, pushed his ledger aside, and looked at Harry with small, bright, entirely unreadable eyes. You received the letter, the goblin said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Come with me. They went deeper into the bank than Harry had ever been. Past the carts and the vaults and the passages that branched off into the dark like veins in rock. The goblin, who introduced himself as Ragnarok, and whose tone suggested this was the only introduction Harry would get, led him through a door that wasn't there until Ragnar pressed his hand to the wall, and then down a corridor lit by blue flame in iron sconces, and finally into a room that was clearly not a room so much as a statement. It was circular. The ceiling was high enough that the top of it was lost in shadow. The floor was black stone, polished to a mirror finish. In the center sat a chair that looked less like furniture and more like the decision of a chair, heavy and ancient and worn smooth by hands going back further than Harry wanted to calculate. Around the walls, shelves upon shelves of locked boxes, files, and objects wrapped in cloth. The air tasted faintly of magic, old magic, the kind that had soaked into stone over centuries and couldn't be washed out. 3 other goblins were already in the room. They stood in a row facing the chair, and the moment Harry walked in, all 3 of them inclined their heads, not a bow, exactly, but something deliberate, something that said we acknowledge what you are. Harry had never had a goblin acknowledge him as anything except a human who needed watching. He kept his face neutral and sat in the chair. Ragnar placed a thick file on the stone table that appeared between them, and folded his hands on top of it. "Lord Potter," he began. "You can just say Harry." Ragnar looked at him with the expression of someone who found informality mildly offensive but was choosing to survive it. "As you prefer. The matter of your inheritance is complex. We have been waiting for your 17th birthday for some time. The details of your family's holdings and bloodline connections have been known to Gringotts since before your birth." He paused. "Some of it was known since before your parents' birth." "How far back does this go?" Harry asked. "Concerning the Potter line?" "Approximately 400 years. Concerning the Gryffindor connection?" Ragnar opened the file. "Godric Gryffindor died without male heirs in the direct sense. His daughter married a man named Pevensey, whose line branched repeatedly over 6 centuries and eventually converged with the Potter bloodline through your paternal great-great-grandmother, Isolde Potter née Gryffindor Pevensey." He looked up. "The vault has been dormant since then. The title lapsed. It reactivates only when a witch or wizard of sufficient magical power comes of age in the primary bloodline." "And the Slytherin connection," Harry said, because he'd been thinking about this since 3 in the morning and he might as well get it out. "That," said Ragnar, and something in his voice shifted, became heavier, "is the more significant complication. Salazar Slytherin's line did not die out. It ran through many families, some openly, most not. Tom Marvolo Riddle carried the primary Slytherin line, but the secondary line, equally valid under ancient wizarding inheritance law, ran through a branch that married into the Evans family in the 1700s. The room was absolutely silent. "My mother's family," Harry said. "Your mother's family." Lily Evans was, by blood, a carrier of the secondary Slytherin inheritance, which is why her protection magic was so extraordinarily powerful. Ancient blood gives ancient magic. She never knew. The squib line had obscured it for 3 generations. Ragnar's fingers moved across the file. "When Voldemort killed her, he, inadvertently, and with exquisite irony, destroyed the last barrier between you and the full Slytherin inheritance. The primary line transferred." Harry was quiet for a long moment. "He killed her," Harry said. "And that made me his heir." "In the most ancient sense of the word?" "Yes." Harry let out a long breath. There was something almost funny about it, a terrible, cosmic sort of funny, the kind that made you either laugh or put your fist through a wall. Harry chose neither. He filed it away. "And Merlin," he said. The 3 goblins behind Ragnar exchanged a look. Ragnar himself straightened slightly in his chair, which Harry had not thought possible. "The House of Merlin," Ragnar said, "is not a blood inheritance in the conventional sense. It is a magical inheritance. It passes to the witch or wizard whose magical signature most closely resonates with Merlin's own at the moment they come of age." He paused. "In 1100 years, it has passed to 7 people. The last was approximately 340 years ago." Harry looked at him steadily. "And now it's me. Now it is you." Ragnar reached into the file and produced a small box, black velvet, simple, the kind of box that knew it didn't need to be fancy. 3 rings. You will feel which finger each belongs to. The rings are bound to your magic, not to your body. They cannot be removed by force, lost, stolen, or destroyed by any magic currently in existence. He set the box on the table. When you put them on, every head of house in Wizarding Britain will feel it. You should be prepared for the response. Harry looked at the box. Then he looked at Ragnar. Is there anything in that file, he said, that tells me what I'm supposed to do with all of this? Ragnar looked at him for a moment, and then said something Harry hadn't expected from a goblin, something that might, if the light was right and you were feeling generous, have been called honest. The file tells you what you have, Ragnar said. What you do with it is, thankfully, not our department. Harry almost smiled. He reached out and opened the box. The rings were nothing like he'd expected. He'd imagined something heavy and ostentatious, the kind of jewelry old portraits wore, thick gold and ugly gemstones. These were simple. Almost plain. A band of deep red gold set with a small lion in relief, Gryffindor's, warm as sunlight the moment his fingers touched it. A band of silver green set with a serpent so fine it looked drawn rather than cast, cold at first, then warming to him, which felt exactly right. And the third, dark bronze, unadorned except for a single engraving on the inner surface that he couldn't read in any language he knew, and which pulsed with a slow, deep light like a second heartbeat. He didn't have to decide which finger. His hand knew. The Gryffindor ring settled on his right index finger. The Slytherin ring, his left index finger. The Merlin ring, his right middle finger. The moment all 3 were on, the pulse he'd felt in his chest when he'd walked into this room became something louder, and the blue flames on the walls flared briefly white. The floor vibrated. Once, like a struck bell. Ragnar nodded as if this was expected. It is done, he said. Lord Potter. Harry flexed his fingers and looked at his hands. They looked exactly the same as they always had, a little scarred, a little rough, nails bitten short from years of anxiety he'd mostly managed to train himself out of. The rings looked almost modest on them. Almost. What happens now? He asked. Now, Ragnar said, standing and beginning to gather the papers, you leave the bank and you discover who in this world already knew what you were, and chose not to tell you. Harry stood. He settled his rucksack on his shoulder. He looked at the room around him one more time, the ancient stone, the shelved secrets, the goblins watching him with those sharp, careful eyes, and he felt something click into place in his chest like a key turning in a very old lock. Done hiding. Done waiting. Done being managed. One more thing, he said, turning back to Ragnar. The Malfoy family. And the Lestranges. What do they owe, under ancient law, to the holder of these 3 lordships? Ragnar smiled. It was not a warm smile. Goblins weren't built for warm smiles. But it was satisfied. Sit back down, Ragnar said. This part of the file will interest you. 2 hours later, Harry Potter walked out of Gringotts and into the morning sunlight of Diagon Alley with a leather satchel under his arm, 3 rings on his fingers, and a very thorough understanding of exactly how much the pure-blooded aristocracy of Wizarding Britain was about to hate him. He bought a breakfast pasty from a cart near the apothecary and ate it walking, because he was 17 and had just inherited the wizarding equivalent of a small sovereign nation, and breakfast still felt like the right move. Hermione found him sitting on a bench outside Flourish and Blots at 9:30, staring at the rings with an expression that she later described as horrifyingly calm. Harry, she said carefully. She had clearly come from the Burrow. She had Molly Weasley's signature of flower on her left sleeve and the particular wild-eyed look of someone who had received too much information too fast. Arthur got a notice this morning. An official one, with 3 seals. He went white, Harry. He actually went white. He made me come and find you immediately. He said, I know, Harry said. You know what Arthur said? No, I mean I know what the notice was. He held up his right hand. Morning light caught the rings. Hermione stared. Her brain, which was the most powerful processing engine Harry had ever personally witnessed, went visibly through several stages of analysis in about 4 seconds. He watched her work through it. He was patient. He knew she'd get there. Gryffindor, she breathed. We knew that was possible. There were theories about your father's line, but Slytherin, Harry, that ring is definitely Slytherin, yes. And the third one is, she stopped. Her eyes went wide. Merlin. Yeah. Harry. She sat down hard on the bench next to him. A woman walking past with a basket stared at Harry's hand and kept walking, then stopped 20 feet away and stared again. Word, it seemed, was already traveling. Harry, do you understand what this means in terms of wizarding law? The political structure alone, 3 lordship seats on the Wizengamot, Gryffindor and Slytherin together control 6 of the 12 founding votes, and Merlin's seat it's a sovereign position, Harry, it supersedes the chief warlock, it supersedes the minister for magic in certain, I know, Harry said. Ragnarok explained it. I've got the documentation. She looked at him. There was a particular look Hermione gave him when she was working out whether to be excited or terrified, and right now both were fighting for control of her face. Are you all right? She asked, more quietly. Yeah, he said. And meant it, which surprised even him. I think, yeah. I actually am. He looked at the rings. Someone's been hiding this from me, Hermione. For years. Dumbledore knew. He had to. The Gringotts file goes back so far, there's no way the headmaster of Hogwarts didn't know what was sitting in that school for 6 years. He didn't say it with bitterness, exactly. It was more like clarity. The way a room looks when someone finally opens a window. I spent 6 years waiting for someone to tell me what I was. What I'm for. And I'm done waiting. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. A couple of witches had gathered near the mouth of a side alley, talking behind their hands and glancing in his direction. Harry didn't look at them. What are you going to do? Hermione asked. I'm calling a Wizengamot session, Harry said. And then I'm paying a visit to Malfoy Manor. Hermione made a sound that might have been a strangled protest or the beginning of a tactical question. Harry looked at her sidelong. You're going to help me, he said. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at the rings. Looked at him. Obviously, she said. They went to the burrow together, and Arthur Weasley's reaction told Harry more than anything else had about what the rings meant to people who actually understood wizarding history. The older man was already at the door when they arrived, and when his eyes landed on Harry's right hand, he went through a visible process that was something like watching a man recalibrate his entire understanding of a situation in real time. Arthur Weasley was not a man given to ceremony or social hierarchy. He thought pureblood elitism was one of the great modern embarrassments, but he was a man who understood tradition, and some things were older than politics. He gripped Harry's hand in both of his. He didn't speak for a moment. Your father, he finally said, would have been completely insufferable about this. Harry laughed. It surprised him how much he laughed. Yeah. Unbearable, Arthur said, his voice rough. Absolutely insufferable. Come inside. Molly Weasley's reaction was simpler and, in its way, more overwhelming. She looked at his hand, looked at his face, and pulled him into a hug so fierce it reminded him that for all the political thunder gathering around him, he was still 17, still the boy who'd arrived at this house with a broken arm and a bedside manner that consisted mostly of I'll be fine, and some things didn't change. Ron was in the kitchen, and his reaction was classic Ron. He looked at the rings, looked at Harry, looked at the rings again, and said, so does this mean you own more of Hogwarts than Dumbledore's portrait? Technically Gryffindor Tower might be my property, yes, Harry said. Ron pointed at him. I want a better room. Hermione made a noise. Neville Longbottom arrived 2 hours later, which told Harry that Augusta Longbottom had received her own notice and had dispatched her grandson with a letter and a set of instructions that Neville summarized, as he came through the door slightly out of breath, as, "Grandmother says the Longbottom seat stands with you, she's been waiting for someone to do this since the 70s, she says don't waste it." Neville looked at Harry's rings and then met his eyes. "The Wizengamot's going to fall apart," Neville said, not unhappily. "The part that needs to fall apart," Harry said. "Yeah." Luna Lovegood arrived 40 minutes after that, which was less expected. She came with her father Xenophilius, who was wearing his most spectacular hat and looked like a man who had been absolutely vindicated on every point he'd ever publicly argued. Luna herself sat down next to Harry at the kitchen table, looked at his right hand, touched the Merlin ring very lightly with one finger, and said, "I always thought you smelled like old magic. Not in a bad way. Like rain before it arrives." Harry had no idea what to say to that. He was starting to find that was the correct response to most things Luna said. "Are you scared?" Luna asked. "No," Harry said. "Good," she said. "Fear makes you smaller. You're not allowed to be small anymore." The formal notice went out that evening. Harry had drafted it in Arthur's study with Hermione and a copy of Wizarding Peerage, Rights, Titles, and Ancient Law that Hermione had produced from her bag with the vindicated expression of a person who had carried an extremely heavy book for years and was finally getting to use it. The document was 3 pages long and impeccably precise, because Hermione wrote it and Hermione was constitutionally incapable of imprecision. It invoked Harry's authority as holder of 3 lordship seats to call an emergency session of the Wizengamot. It named specific parties who were required to appear. It cited the ancient lordship protocols that the ministry hadn't invoked in 300 years, protocols that were, as Hermione explained with barely contained excitement, still fully legally binding and had never been repealed because everyone had simply assumed the houses in question were extinct. "They're going to go absolutely mental," Ron said, reading over Harry's shoulder. "Yes," Harry said, signing his name at the bottom with the quill Ragnarok had given him, a quill that, when used by a lord, carried legal weight equivalent to a ministry seal. 3 signatures, technically. The ink shifted color as he signed, red-gold for Gryffindor, silver-green for Slytherin, and deep bronze for Merlin, the 3 colors bleeding into each other and then settling into a composite that looked like nothing so much as an aurora. "That's actually beautiful," Hermione said quietly. Harry set the quill down. He looked at the document. Then he folded it and handed it to the official ministry owl that had been waiting patiently on the windowsill for the past hour, and he watched it disappear into the evening sky. Somewhere in Wiltshire, in a manor house that had stood for 600 years on the foundations of old money and older cruelty, he imagined Lucius Malfoy receiving his copy. He imagined the precise, controlled way the man would open it. The measured stillness that would fall over his face. The calculation behind cold grey eyes. And then the moment, just a moment, when Lucius Malfoy read the 3rd seal and understood. Harry hoped that moment lasted a long time. He stayed the night at the Burrow, in Percy's old room, which was slightly too neat and smelled of parchment. He lay in the dark with his hands folded on his chest, 3 rings catching the faint light from the window. He thought about his parents. About his mother's Muggle family, carrying Slytherin blood for 3 generations without knowing it, and about his father's line going back to a man with a sword and a lion's temper and more courage than sense. He thought about Merlin, actual, historical, impossible Merlin, and the fact that apparently he, Harry, who had once been locked in a cupboard under a staircase, was now that man's magical heir. He thought about Dumbledore, who had known. He couldn't be angry anymore. The anger had done its work over the summer and burnt itself out, and what was left was something cooler and more useful. Dumbledore had made choices. Some of them had been about protecting Harry. Some of them had been about protecting the plan. The 2 things weren't always the same, and now Harry had the means and the authority to stop being anyone else's plan. He thought about the Malfoys. About Lucius, who had put a diary designed to kill children into an 11-year-old girl's cauldron, and smiled about it. About Bellatrix, who had tortured the Longbottoms into living death and murdered Sirius, laughing as she did it. About Draco, who was 17 years old and had spent that summer trying to be a murderer and failing, and the complicated terrible mercy of that failure. None of it made him angry. Anger was the luxury of someone who had no options. He had options now. He had ancient, irrevocable, legally binding options. He let himself sleep. He dreamed of a great hall he didn't recognize, older than Hogwarts, older than almost anything, with a table around which sat 4 figures he couldn't quite see, and at the head of the table, a 5th. The 5th figure looked up, and Harry couldn't make out a face. But the figure raised one hand, and on the middle finger was a ring of dark bronze, pulsing with that deep, slow light like a second heartbeat. Harry raised his own right hand. The figure nodded. When he woke up, the sun was just clearing the horizon and every owl in the Burrow's henhouse was making noise, because the replies to his notice had begun arriving. He counted 11 responses before the kettle boiled. 3 were outraged. 2 were cautiously deferential. 1 was from Amelia Bones, who had written only, "About time." Bones stands with the ancient seats. A.B. And 1, the last one, the one that made Ron go very quiet when he saw the seal, was from Malfoy Manor. Thick parchment. Lucius Malfoy's handwriting, even and controlled as ever. "We will attend." 4 words. No argument, no legal counter-challenge, no political maneuvering. Just, "We will attend." Which told Harry more than 100 words of protest would have. Because Lucius Malfoy didn't concede ground. He didn't yield to the inevitable. He adapted to it, positioned himself within it, found the angle that let him survive. He had read Harry's notice, and he had decided that the angle which let him survive ran through compliance, not resistance. Harry set the letter down and drank his tea and looked out the window at the morning. Good, he thought. Start there. Chapter 2, The summons. The Wizengamot chamber hadn't changed in 400 years, and it showed. The tiered stone seating curved in a horseshoe around the central floor, each seat worn smooth by generations of witches and wizards who had argued, legislated, condemned, and occasionally fallen asleep in them. The ceiling was high and vaulted, hung with enchanted torches that cast a flat, impartial gold light over everything. There were no windows. The chamber existed outside of weather, outside of time of day, outside of the ordinary world in a way that was probably meant to convey timeless authority and instead mostly conveyed that the people who built it had wanted it to feel like being inside a very expensive cave. Harry had been here once before, in a chair in the center of the floor, facing judgment. He arrived through the visitor's entrance at 9 in the morning, an hour before the session was called. The attendant at the door, a young woman with a ministry badge and the careful neutral expression of someone who had been briefed, looked at his rings before she looked at his face, and then stepped aside without asking for his name. Hermione was 3 steps behind him, with a satchel full of documents that she had spent the past 2 days organizing with a level of systematic ferocity that had made everyone else in the Burrow instinctively find reasons to be in other rooms. Neville was on his left, wearing his Longbottom house robes for the first time in his life, dark green, gold trim, the Longbottom crest at the breast. He looked slightly startled to be wearing them, the way someone looks when they've just found out clothes can mean something. Ron was not with them. He was waiting outside with Luna, which was Ron's assignment and which he'd accepted with only mild complaint. They were the early warning if anyone attempted anything before Harry was seated. Ron had his own wand and no patience for people who started things they couldn't finish, which made him the ideal person for the role. The chamber was already half full when Harry walked in, and the sound of it, the low, collective murmur of 40-odd witches and wizards who had been arguing quietly since arriving, dropped by about half the moment people saw him. The other half dropped 30 seconds later, in a wave, as his arrival registered around the room like a stone thrown into still water. Harry walked to the central floor and did not stop walking until he reached the 3 seats at the very head of the chamber. The lordship seats. They'd been covered for decades. Not physically, there were no sheets, no barriers. Just the particular invisibility of things everyone had agreed to stop looking at, the way a family portrait of a disgraced relative gets turned to face the wall until everyone forgets it was ever there. 3 high-backed seats, carved from different stones, warm sandstone for Gryffindor, pale grey-green slate for Slytherin, and for Merlin's seat, something that looked like nothing so much as compressed night sky, dark and faintly luminous, set slightly higher than the rest of the chamber's seating and slightly apart from the political affiliations of the surrounding rows. Nobody had sat in them in living memory. Harry sat in all 3. Not literally, he wasn't physically capable of occupying 3 seats simultaneously, whatever the rings might imply about his magical authority. But under the ancient lordship protocols, which Hermione had sourced, annotated, and practically memorized, a holder of multiple seats could designate proxies for the additional seats and still exercise the combined voting authority of all 3. Harry sat in Gryffindor's seat. He placed his right hand on the Slytherin seat's armrest. The Merlin seat remained formally empty beside him, and the faint luminescence of its stone brightened noticeably the moment he sat down, as if acknowledging his proximity. The murmur in the chamber died completely. Neville took the Longbottom seat 2 rows back and to Harry's left, aligned with the Ancient Houses section. He sat straight-backed, chin up, looking like Augusta Longbottom had spent 48 hours drilling posture into him, which she probably had. Hermione settled into the public observer's bench with her satchel and opened it silently, laying out her documents with the efficiency of someone preparing a battlefield. Cornelius Fudge was in the chamber. Harry noticed him in the 3rd row, pale and sweating, his lime green bowler hat conspicuously absent. Someone had apparently told him it wasn't appropriate for a formal lordship session. He looked like a man who had swallowed something that disagreed with him and couldn't decide whether to spit it out or just suffer through it. Umbridge was not present. Harry hadn't required her attendance and hadn't expected her to come voluntarily. She was smart enough, at least, to know when a room was above her particular grade of cruelty. Rufus Scrimgeour arrived at 9:45, moving with the controlled power of a man who had built his reputation on never being obviously rattled. The new Minister for Magic took his seat, looked at Harry across the chamber floor, and gave him a very small, very deliberate nod. Not deference, recognition. 2 people assessing each other across a room before the game began. Harry returned the nod. And then, at 9:52, 8 minutes before the formal session was called, the Malfoys arrived. Lucius Malfoy entered the Wizengamot chamber the way he entered every room, as if the room had been waiting for him and had been somewhat improved by his arrival. He wore deep charcoal robes with silver trim, his cane in his right hand, his wife on his left. His face was composed, his expression carrying that particular Malfoy quality of looking slightly bored by the entire proceeding, as if important events were things that happened to lesser people. Harry watched him cross the chamber floor and felt absolutely nothing in particular, which was interesting. 6 months ago, Lucius Malfoy had triggered a specific cold fury in him, the response to a man who had hurt people Harry loved and smiled while doing it. Now Harry watched him move and felt something more like the focused attention of a chess player watching an opponent pick up a piece. Narcissa Malfoy walked beside her husband with the composed elegance of someone who had spent 3 decades making difficult things look effortless. She was paler than Harry remembered, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. The war was working on her face the way it worked on everyone who cared about someone on the wrong side of it. Draco was behind them. He was wearing Malfoy robes and Malfoy posture and approximately half the Malfoy face, the contemptuous tilt of the chin, the lidded eyes, but the other half was doing something different. Something Harry recognized because he'd seen it on his own face in mirrors for years, the particular stillness of someone trying very hard not to show that they were reading a room with desperate attention, cataloging exits and threats and angles, assessing whether they were safe. Draco met Harry's eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he looked away. The Lestrange contingent arrived 2 minutes later. Rabaston Lestrange was a grey-bearded man who looked like he'd been left in a cellar for 20 years and had arranged his personality accordingly. Rodolphius Lestrange was broader, darker, and had the particular quality of a man who had committed terrible acts not out of passion but out of conviction, which was in some ways worse. Bellatrix was not with them. Harry had expected that. Bellatrix-Lestrange was a wanted criminal and couldn't enter the ministry without being arrested. Her absence from this particular meeting had its own meaning, though. It meant the family had sent the legal and political contingent, the men who handled the paperwork and the public face, and kept their most dangerous asset in reserve. Harry filed that away. The Lestranges took their seats in the old money section, which was half empty now compared to a generation ago. 20 years of Voldemort had been terrible for the pureblood aristocracy's roster. Several of the founding house seats were empty, their holders dead or imprisoned or in exile. At 10 o'clock precisely, the ancient bell at the head of the chamber rang once, and Madame Longpike, the Wizengamot senior administrator, a brisk woman in her 60s who had seen 4 ministers for magic come and go and had the patient authority of someone who knew she'd outlast this one too, called the session to order. This emergency session has been called under Articles 14 through 17 of the ancient lordship protocols, she announced, her voice carrying easily in the vaulted room. The session is presided over by the holder of 3 lordship seats, the Lord of the Houses of Gryffindor, Slytherin, and Merlin, Harry James Potter. The session is formally open. The silence in the room had a particular quality now. Harry had heard library silence, and courtroom silence, and the silence just before a spell hits you. This was different. This was the silence of 40 people who were used to knowing how things worked suddenly discovering that the rules were different and had been different for some time, they just hadn't been applied. Harry stood. "Thank you, Madame Longpike," he said. His voice was steady and unhurried in the way that comes from simply not being afraid. "I'll try to keep this straightforward." He reached into his jacket, not robes, because he'd decided against robes deliberately, because he wasn't playing at tradition, he was operating through it, and produced a sheaf of documents. He set them on the Gryffindor seat's inlaid stone surface, and they fanned out in a precise spread that he practiced exactly once. "The first order of business is financial," Harry said. "The Gringotts audit completed in connection with my inheritance has identified 11 active accounts, 14 property holdings, and 3 ongoing financial instruments that derive their legal foundation from grants made under Gryffindor lordship authority in the 15 and 1600s. Several of those instruments have been held in abeyance pending a living lordship claim." He paused. "That abeyance is now ended." He looked at Lucius Malfoy. Lucius met his gaze and did not look away. His expression was perfectly controlled. His right hand was very still on his cane. "The Malfoy family holds 2 properties under a Gryffindor land grant issued in 1583, Harry said. "Specifically, the Wiltshire Northern Estate and the London Townhouse Act, those properties have been held by my family for over 4 centuries, Lucius said. His voice was smooth and cool and showed nothing. "Through unbroken occupation then, through unbroken occupation of a lordship grant," Harry said, "that requires active lordship authority to remain valid. Article 31 of the Lands and Titles Charter of 1591 is quite specific on that point." He lifted one of the documents. "Hermione?" From the observer's bench, Hermione held up a duplicate copy of the relevant page, which she'd bookmarked and annotated and probably memorized. Several of the Wizengamot members craned their necks to see. Madame Longpike accepted a copy from the ministry clerk who hurried it to her and reviewed it with the expression of someone who knew exactly what it said. Lucius Malfoy's jaw moved, very slightly. It was the equivalent, in Lucius Malfoy terms, of a scream. "Now, I'm not here to evict anyone," Harry said, pleasantly. "The properties can be purchased. At current market value, assessed by independent valuers appointed by Gringotts, not the ministry." He let that sit for a moment. "Or they revert under the charter. That's the entirety of the options." "You're using a 400-year-old land grant," Scrimgeour said from his seat, his voice neutral and professional, "to compel a real estate transaction." "I'm enforcing a 400-year-old land grant," Harry said, "that has been on the books the entire time. Nobody repealed it. Nobody challenged it. Nobody was able to challenge it because the relevant lordship seat was vacant." He looked at Scrimgeour directly. It's not vacant anymore. Scrimgeour looked back at him, and in his eyes was the complex expression of a politician watching someone else pick up a tool they had wanted for themselves. Proceed, the minister said. The Slytherin matters were thornier and more satisfying in equal measure. The Slytherin lordship carried with it a series of hereditary obligations that ran in the opposite direction from the Gryffindor grants, not properties that Harry could claim, but oaths that certain families had made to the Slytherin house over centuries, oaths of political alignment that were, under the ancient law, still binding. Not personally binding in the sense of making grown adults his servants, that hadn't been the structure of wizarding oaths for centuries. But binding in the sense that those families had, by their ancestors' sworn word, committed to vote with the Slytherin seat on a specific list of legislative matters. Harry produced the list of those families. The Lestranges were on it. So, surprisingly, were the Parkinsons. And the Knotts. And 4 other old pureblood families who had been voting as a bloc on the Voldemort-adjacent side of Wizengamot business for 20 years. Lestrange stood. "This is absurd," he said. "Those oaths were made to Salazar Slytherin's direct line, which I now hold," Harry said. "The inheritance chain is documented. Gringotts has certified it. If you'd like to challenge the certification, you're welcome to take it to the Gringotts Arbitration Council, but I should mention that the council has already been briefed and has validated the claim." "You can't honestly expect, I expect," Harry said, looking at Rabaston with a directness that stopped the older man mid-sentence, "the ancient oaths to be honored. Your family made those commitments voluntarily, through your ancestors, and has benefited from Slytherin House's political cover for decades. The obligations run both ways. That's how oaths work." Rabaston sat down. He looked at his brother. Rodolphus's face was completely blank, which was somehow more disturbing than anger would have been. "The practical implication," Harry continued, moving on with the calm of someone who has a great deal more material and is conserving energy, "is that on the 4 specific legislative items currently tabled before this body, the Blood Status Registry repeal, the Wizengamot Representation Reform Act, the Gringotts Ministry Financial Oversight Resolution, and the Azkaban Oversight Proposal, the families under Slytherin oath obligation vote yes. Per their ancestral commitment." The chamber erupted. Not violently, this was the Wizengamot, not a pub fight, but with the particular cacophony of 50 people all deciding they had something urgent to say simultaneously. Harry stood in the middle of it and waited. He had, Hermione had told him during preparation, done something that would make the next 15 minutes loud. He just had to survive the loud part. Neville, from his seat, was watching with the contained expression of someone very carefully not grinning. Madame Longpike called for order 3 times, and when order arrived, it arrived in fragments, like a broken plate being reassembled. Harry used the pause to look at Lucius Malfoy. Lucius was speaking quietly to the witch beside him, a Malfoy ally from the Avery family, Harry believed, in a murmur too low to hear. His face had recovered its composure. He looked like a man revising a plan that had just become more complicated, not a man losing. Harry noted this carefully. "There's one more matter," Harry said, when the chamber had quieted enough to hear him. "And I want to be clear that this one is not a legal instrument. It's not a financial obligation or a voting commitment. It's a personal matter, and I'm raising it here, in this forum, because I want it to be public and I want it to be on record." The chamber went very still. "Lucius Malfoy," Harry said, and his voice didn't change in tone at all, didn't go cold or sharp, just stayed level, introduced a dark artifact into Hogwarts School in 1992 with the specific intent of opening the Chamber of Secrets and engineering the deaths of Muggle-born students. That artifact was Voldemort's diary Horcrux. My friend Hermione Granger was among those petrified. A 12-year-old girl, Ginny Weasley, was nearly killed. He did this knowingly. He has not been prosecuted. Lucius Malfoy looked at him across the chamber. His expression had changed now, very slightly, very carefully, to something that was still composed but had a new quality in it, like glass that has been stressed and is waiting to decide whether to crack or hold. "I am filing a formal criminal referral," Harry said, producing the final document, under my authority as a lordship holder, which, under Article 8 of the Ancient Protocols, grants me standing to bring criminal charges before this body without requiring a preliminary ministry investigation. He placed the document on the clerk's desk. The evidence is attached. I would appreciate the Wizengamot's attention to it within the next 30 days. He looked at Lucius one more time. That'll be all from me for now, Harry said. Thank you. He sat down. The session dissolved into controlled chaos that lasted about an hour, during which Harry sat in Godric Gryffindor's seat and listened to arguments, counter-arguments, objections, and the occasional outright personal insult with the equanimity of someone who had made peace with being disliked by the right people a long time ago. Scrimgeour navigated the procedural fallout with professional competence. The man was not Harry's ally and never would be, but he was genuinely skilled at managing political crises, and he managed this one without letting it tip over into disorder. The blood status registry repeal passed. 51 to 17, with the Slytherin oath votes included. Harry watched it happen and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for a very long time. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, while Hermione was repacking her satchel with the focused energy of someone coming down from a very complicated adrenaline high, Neville appeared at Harry's elbow and said, quietly, "Lucius Malfoy is trying to leave quickly." Harry looked. Sure enough, across the corridor, Lucius was moving toward the lifts with Narcissa and Draco, the particular rapid purposeful walk of a man who is choosing not to look like he's retreating. "Let him," Harry said. Neville raised an eyebrow. "He knows what's coming next," Harry said. "Letting him walk out of here and prepare for it isn't weakness. It's courtesy." He paused. "And it means he'll think I'm giving him time to build defenses." "Which I am." "Because you can go through them?" Neville asked. Harry almost smiled. "Because when I walk through them, he'll know it wasn't an accident." Neville was quiet for a moment. "Then, you've changed." "Yeah. You used to look at Malfoy like he was a problem you couldn't solve. You look at him now like he's I don't know. Like he's a door that you've already found the key for and you're just deciding when to open it." Harry thought about that. "That's a better metaphor than I would have used," he said, "but yeah. Pretty much." They had lunch at the Leaky Cauldron, Hermione ordering in the distracted manner of someone still processing, Ron eating with the focused devotion of a man treating lunch as a genuine priority, Neville working through the implications of the morning with quiet systematic thoughts that he shared in pieces. Luna had disappeared somewhere around 11 and reappeared now with a small plant Harry didn't recognize, which she placed in the center of the table and announced was good for mental clarity. Ron looked at it. "Does it help with headaches?" "It causes headaches at first," Luna said cheerfully. "But then the clarity comes." Ron moved it to the windowsill. "The Malfoy financial exposure is bigger than we even laid out today," Hermione said, pulling a notebook from her bag. "If we pursue the full Gryffindor grant review, there are at least 4 more properties, and Gringotts flagged 3 financial instruments that might also fall under Slytherin lordship obligations. We could effectively, not all at once," Harry said. Hermione looked up. "Lucius Malfoy is smart," Harry said. "If we come at him with everything at once, he'll find a procedural hole somewhere and use the noise to escape through it. We take it in layers." He tore a piece of bread. "He also needs to know that the legal stuff isn't the point. It's the frame." "The frame for what?" Ron asked. "The frame for Malfoy Manor." The table went quiet. "You're still doing that," Hermione said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Going to his house. His territory. With his entire family there." "Yes." Hermione looked at him carefully, the way she looked when she was trying to determine whether something was brilliant or reckless and was finding the line frustratingly thin. "When?" 3 days, Harry said. "The notice goes tonight. And this time it's not a request." He looked at Ron. "You're coming." Ron sat up. "Obviously." "Hermione." "Clearly, she said, closing her notebook. Neville. Yes, said Neville, without hesitation, in a voice that sounded like Augusta Longbottom had prepared him for exactly this. Which she probably had. Harry looked at Luna. Luna was looking at the plant on the windowsill with a small, private smile. I dreamed about a white peacock last week, she said. I think that means I should come. Harry had no idea what white peacock symbolism meant in Luna's personal taxonomy of signs, but he'd learned over the past year that Luna's intuitions had a way of turning out to be more accurate than anyone expected. Then you're coming, he said. The notice went to Malfoy Manor that evening, and it went differently from the Wizengamot summons. No gold seal, no legal instrument. Just Harry's 3-signature mark on plain parchment, and 6 words, I will arrive on Thursday morning. Not, I request. Not, if it is convenient. Not any of the elaborate formal language of wizarding courtesy that could be navigated around and negotiated with. I will arrive. Lucius Malfoy's reply came back within the hour. The Manor receives you. Harry read it. Set it down. Noted that Lucius had chosen the word receives, not welcomes, not invites. Receives. A carefully selected word from a man who chose every word carefully. It said, you are acknowledged. It said, we are prepared. It said, underneath everything, we are not afraid of you. Which meant they were. He's scared, Ron said, reading over Harry's shoulder. He's prepared, Harry said. Those aren't the same thing. Lucius Malfoy scared is Lucius Malfoy dangerous. So what do we do about that? Harry folded the letter. We be more prepared. He spent the next 2 days doing exactly that, not with documents and legal instruments, but with magic. He worked in the Burrow's back garden in the mornings, when everyone else was asleep, exploring what the rings did to his casting. It wasn't dramatic. There were no explosions, no lightning strikes, no sudden glowing transformations of the self. What happened was quieter and more fundamental, his spells hit harder. His shield work had a depth to it that hadn't been there before. When he cast Lumos, the light was broader and cleaner, as if his magic had more room inside it than it used to. The Merlin ring in particular was doing something he didn't fully understand yet. When he focused through it, and it did have a particular sensation, like leaning against something very old and very solid, spells he hadn't cast cleanly in years came out perfectly on the first try. Things that should have taken effort arrived effortlessly. Not because he was tired or lacking discipline, but because the magic had a new quality, a sense of being fully aligned with itself. He didn't tell Hermione about all of it. She would want to study it, document it, run controlled tests, and write extremely detailed notes. That wasn't what he needed. He needed to understand it in the way you understand a sword, not by reading about it, but by finding out how it moves. On Wednesday evening, he sat on the Burrow's garden wall and watched the sunset and did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter. Longhand, careful, the kind of letter you write when you know it matters. He wrote it to Sirius, who was dead and couldn't read it, which didn't make it pointless. He'd read once that letters to the dead were for the living. He wrote about the rings. About the Wizengamot. About what was coming tomorrow. He wrote about being afraid, not of the Malfoys, not of whatever traps Lucius was preparing, but of becoming something cold and hard. Of letting power do what power did to people who didn't watch it carefully. I don't want to become someone you'd have to be worried about, he wrote. Not the way Dumbledore worried about me, like I was a loaded weapon that needed managing. I want to be someone you'd have been proud of. I'm trying to figure out if those two things can both be true at the same time. He folded it and didn't send it. He put it in his jacket pocket instead, where it would be with him tomorrow. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, clouds low over the countryside, a wind coming off the hills that smelled like rain a few hours away. Harry dressed in plain dark clothing, no robes, not for this, and put his wand in his right sleeve and the Gringotts satchel over his shoulder. Hermione was already downstairs. She'd made tea. She handed him a cup without saying anything, because some mornings the right thing is tea without commentary, and she knew him well enough to know this was one of them. Ron came down 5 minutes later with his hair still chaotic from sleep and immediately ate 3 pieces of toast, because Ron Weasley's approach to high-stakes situations always began with making sure he wasn't hungry. Neville arrived from his own home by flu at 7, once again in Longbottom House robes, once again with Augusta's particular type of dignity pressed into his spine like scaffolding. Luna arrived at 7:15 from the direction of the garden, having apparently come through the gate without anyone hearing her, carrying a small bag and wearing robes of pale silver that looked older than they should have. Harry looked at the 5 of them. His people. His actual, chosen, irrevocable people. Right, he said. Let's go. They apparat to the Wiltshire Lane just outside the Malfoy Manor wards, as close as the wards allowed, and walked the last quarter mile on foot. The Manor's gates were ahead, tall and iron and topped with the Malfoy crest, and open. They were standing open, which told Harry that Lucius had chosen the appearance of welcome over the honesty of a closed gate, which was very Lucius Malfoy. As Harry walked through the open gates onto Malfoy land, the Merlin ring pulsed once, warm and deep, like a heartbeat. Not a warning. More like acknowledgement. Like old magic touching older magic and recognizing itself. The peacocks on the lawn, white, impossible, exactly as Luna had described, moved out of the path as they approached, and Harry noted that without surprise. The Manor's front door opened before they reached it. Lucius Malfoy stood in the doorway. He looked, in the pale morning light, like the portrait of a man rather than the man himself, every line precise, every element of his appearance a considered choice. His expression was the expression of a chess master who has just watched his opponent's opening and is recalibrating at speed. He looked at the rings. He looked at Harry's face. Harry climbed the front steps without slowing. Lord Potter, Lucius said. Lucius, Harry said. Not Mr. Malfoy. Not Lord Malfoy. Just the first name, the specific, deliberate informality of someone who has established they are the senior party in the room and doesn't need the formality to prove it. It was a small thing. It landed in the air between them with the weight of something much larger. Lucius stepped aside and let him in. Chapter 3, The Reckoning. Malfoy Manor was cold in the way that very old houses are cold, not from the temperature, but from the weight of the stone, from centuries of calculated living pressing down through the floors and walls. The entrance hall was enormous, flagged with black and white marble, hung with portraits whose subjects had all gone very still and very watchful. Enchanted candles floated above a staircase that curved upward like a question no one had ever answered honestly. Harry had been here once before, on the worst night of the war so far, bleeding on this floor while Hermione screamed in the room above him. He remembered the marble. He remembered the sound. He walked across it now without pausing, without letting his eyes drop to the spot, because that memory had its place and that place was not here, not today. Lucius led them through the entrance hall and into the Manor's great receiving room, a space designed with the specific purpose of impressing people who weren't already impressive. Arched ceilings, tapestries along the walls that depicted Malfoy genealogy going back to the Norman conquest, furniture that was simultaneously old and immaculate. A fire burned in a hearth large enough to park 2 motorbikes in, and the light from it was the only warm thing in the room. Narcissa was standing near the fire when they entered. She was dressed as precisely as her husband, but where Lucius's appearance was armor, hers felt more like a braced position, someone standing with perfect stillness because movement might betray something. Her eyes went to Harry, then to the rings, then back to Harry's face, and what crossed her expression was complicated and quick and then carefully gone. Draco was seated in a high-backed chair near the window, slightly apart from his parents in a way that might have been coincidence or might have been the most honest thing about the room's arrangement. He looked up when Harry's group entered, and his face was doing that split thing Harry had noticed in the Wizengamot chamber, half Malfoy, half something else that didn't have a name yet. The Lestrange brothers were on a settee to the right, Rabaston with his grey-bearded face closed and watchful, Rodolphus with the particular stillness of a man who has decided to wait and see before deciding anything. Their presence was a message from Lucius: you are not the only force in this room. Harry registered all of it in the first 4 seconds and then stopped in the center of the room. Sit wherever you like, Lucius said from behind him, moving to stand near the fire beside Narcissa. The tone was perfectly hospitable. It was a masterclass in making we acknowledge you sound like we're doing you a favor. I'm fine standing, Harry said. He turned to face the room. Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Luna spread naturally behind him, not in a tactical formation, just the way people spread when they trust each other, each one taking a space that felt right. Luna sat down on a chair near the door with her bag in her lap as if she'd been invited for tea. The effect was somehow more unsettling than if she'd looked threatening. I want to be honest about why I'm here, Harry said. Not because I owe you honesty, but because I think it's more efficient than the alternative. Lucius tilted his head very slightly. Go on. The Wizengamot session was the legal work, Harry said. The groundwork. The things that have your name in them because they need to be on record before anything else happens. That's not what this is. He looked around the room. At Lucius. At Narcissa. At Draco. At the Lestranges. This is the conversation those documents can't have. Rabastin made a short sound. If this is an attempt to, Rabastin, Rodolphus said quietly, and his brother stopped. Harry looked at Rodolphus. The man looked back with flat, dark eyes. An intelligent man, Harry had always thought, the Lestranges were never stupid, which was half of what made them dangerous. The other half was that they believed completely in what they served. What do you want, Potter? Lucius asked. The directness was itself a signal. They were past the performance, at least on Lucius's end. A man choosing efficiency over theater was a man who had decided his best option was understanding the situation as quickly as possible. A few things, Harry said. Some of them you're going to find straightforward. Some of them you're going to hate. He paused. Let's start with the Lestrange family. Both brothers went very still. The 4 properties currently held under Slytherin House grant, Harry said, revert within 30 days under the same charter provision that governs the Malfoy holdings. Unlike the Malfoy matter, I'm not offering a purchase option. The properties go to Gringotts Trust, to be reallocated for the rebuilding of structures destroyed in Voldemort's campaign. He let that settle. Those families lost their homes because of the movement you both served and funded. Their homes get rebuilt with your assets. That feels proportionate to me. Rabastin stood up. He was a tall man, and the standing was meant to be a physical assertion. You're using lordship authority to redistribute stolen prosperity, Harry said. The Lestrange family's wealth in the 15th century was built on the labor of wizard kind who had no legal recourse or protection under the then existing power structure. The Slytherin grants formalized that extraction. I'm Slytherin's heir. I get to disagree with how the grants were used. He met Rabastin's eyes. Sit down, please. Rabastin did not sit down. Harry looked at him for a long, steady moment. He didn't reach for his wand. He didn't alter his posture or his expression. He just looked at Rabastin Lestrange with the particular quality of a person who is not asking a second time and doesn't need to. The Merlin ring pulsed. Not visibly, no light, no display. Just that deep, slow heartbeat against his finger, and a sense of something very large and very old quietly making itself felt in the room's magical atmosphere the way a change in barometric pressure makes itself felt before a storm. Rabastin sat down. It happened without drama, almost without Rabastin seeming to decide to do it. He simply sat, and in the sitting was a particular type of capitulation that Harry suspected Rabastin would be furious about later in private. Draco, in his chair by the window, had gone very still. Lucius Malfoy spoke then, and he spoke in a measured tone that Harry recognized as the man's actual voice, not the performance, not the drawl, the voice of someone engaging seriously. You have considerable legal authority, Lucius said. And you've exercised it with considerable precision. A pause that contained a professional's acknowledgement. The Gryffindor and Slytherin grant provisions are airtight. I checked them myself yesterday. He looked at his cane, then back at Harry. But you haven't come here merely to enforce property law. The legal instruments could have been executed without this meeting. No, Harry agreed. So. Lucius's grey eyes were precise, measuring. What is the actual condition you're here to impose? I'm not imposing conditions, Harry said. I'm drawing a line. There's a meaningful difference. Yes. Conditions are negotiable. A line is just where the ground is. Harry looked at the man steadily. The Malfoy family has been on the wrong side of every significant decision in the past 30 years, Lucius. Not because you're stupid, you're not. Not because you didn't see how it was going to end, you did, I think, earlier than most. But because the power structure you benefited from required Voldemort's existence to function, and you chose the structure over everything else. He paused. Including your son. The word son landed in the room differently from everything else Harry had said. He watched it happen. Narcissa's breath changed. Draco's chin came up. Lucius's stillness became a different kind of stillness, not control, but something held down beneath control. I'm not here to punish Draco, Harry said, looking at Draco directly for the first time since entering. I'm aware of what happened last year. I'm aware of what you were asked to do and what you didn't do. He watched Draco's face. I'm also aware that not doing a terrible thing doesn't automatically make you someone who does good ones. Draco looked back at him. His jaw was tight. He said nothing, which was interesting. The old Draco would have said something cutting at this point almost reflexively. The person in that chair was choosing silence, and the choice was visible in every muscle of his face. Here's the line, Harry said, bringing the room back. Voldemort ends. That's not a plan, it's not an ambition, it's a fact that's going to happen, and the only variable is how many people are standing when it does. The Malfoy family can be among those people. The Lestranges, he turned to look at Rodolphus and Rabastin, have a different calculation to make, because your crimes are documented and the criminal referral process I used this week works in both directions. I can also file charges. You'd need Bellatrix's testimony too, Rabastin started. I wouldn't need Bellatrix's testimony for anything, Harry said flatly. I have Hermione. The room's eyes went to Hermione. She was standing with her arms at her sides and her satchel over her shoulder, and the particular expression she wore when she was ready to do something that she'd been overqualified for the entire time. She reached into the satchel and produced a second sheaf of documents, thicker than the ones from the Wizengamot session. She set them on the nearest table with a precise, deliberate sound. Financial records, correspondence, and testimony from 11 witnesses regarding the Lestrange family's financing of Death Eater operations in the First War, she said, in a completely even voice. Cross-referenced with Gringotts' vault transaction records from 1970 to 1981. The Lordship filing authority means these go directly to the Wizengamot without a preliminary ministry review. Rodolphus Lestrange looked at the documents. Then he looked at Hermione. Then he looked at Harry. You brought a weapon, Rodolphus said. His voice was low and without inflection. I brought my friend, Harry said. She's just also a weapon. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Rodolphus was quiet. Then, very quietly, what do you want from us? Nothing, Harry said. I want you to understand that the world you were trying to build is over. I want that to be something you've genuinely reckoned with rather than something you're waiting to reverse. He looked at both brothers. And I want you to know that if I find out either of you has taken any action in support of Voldemort's operations after today, the documents on that table go to every member of the Wizengamot by morning. Every one. The fire crackled. Outside, the grey morning had deepened, the clouds thickening toward the rain that had been threatening since dawn. Rodolphus Lestrange looked at his hands. He looked at the documents. He looked at Harry with the eyes of a man who was watching his entire architecture of belief and justification being dismantled and who was, perhaps for the first time, genuinely without a counter-argument. He nodded. Once. Tight and small and absolute. The next hour was when things broke. It happened because of Draco. He'd been quiet through all of it, the legal argument, the Lestrange confrontation, the line Harry had drawn. He'd sat in his chair by the window with his hands in his lap and his face doing the private war Harry had been half-watching throughout. And when Hermione sat down with her documents and Neville started a quiet conversation with Luna near the door and the room's immediate tension eased into something more procedural, Draco stood up. "Why are you doing this?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. The inflection was wrong for a question, too flat, too pressurized. Like something that had been building for too long and finally had an exit. Harry turned to look at him. "Why are you?" Draco's voice was controlled but the control was effortful, audible in the clipped rhythm. "You have everything. 3 lordships. Wizengamot authority. You walk in here and you dismantle everything my father spent 30 years building, you make the Lestranges look like they'd been told off in front of the whole class, and you do it all with that," he stopped, seemed to search for the word, "that patience, like none of this is even hard for you. Like it's nothing." "It's not nothing," Harry said. "Then why aren't you angry? You should be furious." Draco stopped. His jaw worked. "I spent 6 years making your life miserable. My father tried to have you killed. My aunt," he cut off that sentence before it finished. "You should want to make us pay." "Why don't you want to make us pay?" "Draco," Lucius said, low and warning. "No." Draco looked at his father and it was the look of someone who has been holding a conversation back for years and has decided today is when it comes out. "No, I want to understand this. Because I've been sitting here watching him," a gesture toward Harry that managed to be both frustrated and something close to honest, "and I can't figure out what he is. He should be gloating. He's got every right to gloat. He's got every right to walk in here and make us crawl and enjoy every second of it. Why isn't he?" The room was very quiet. Narcissa was watching her son with an expression like someone watching a ship go over the edge of the map. Harry looked at Draco for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "Because making you crawl doesn't fix anything." "It would fix how it felt," Draco said. The honesty of it, raw and unguarded and completely un-Malfoy, seemed to surprise even him. "Maybe," Harry said. "For about 10 minutes. He took a breath. "You know what I actually want? I want the war to end. I want the people still at risk to stop being at risk. I want to build something after this that isn't just a better version of the same rotten structure." He looked at Draco with the directness that he used when he was done with the formal language. "I don't want to make you crawl, Draco. I want you to make a choice. An actual one. Not because your family tells you to, not because you're scared of what happens if you don't. A real choice." Draco stared at him. His face was doing something complicated that Harry suspected the boy didn't have a lot of experience with, the particular discomfort of being offered something genuine after a lifetime of transactional exchanges. "And if I don't?" Draco asked. "Then you don't," Harry said simply. "I'm not going to force you. That's the point." Lucius was watching this exchange with an expression Harry couldn't fully read, not anger, not calculation. Something older. Something that might, in the right light, have been grief. "Enough," Lucius said. But the word had no edge in it. It came out flat and heavy, like a stone being set down rather than thrown. It was Narcissa who changed the shape of the room. She stepped forward from the fireplace. It was a small movement, 3 steps, maybe 4, but in the charged atmosphere of that room it had the quality of a decision being made. Lucius looked at her. She didn't look at him. She looked at Harry. "I owe you a debt," she said. Her voice was clear and steady and contained nothing that wasn't true. "In the forest. You were dead, or we were both certain you were, and I lied to the Dark Lord on the strength of one question about my son. She paused. You didn't ask me to. You had no obligation to help me and no reason to trust that I wouldn't betray you the moment Draco was safe. Another pause. I have thought about that since. So have I, Harry said. A life debt, under ancient law. I'm not here to collect a life debt, Harry said. That's not what the rings are for. I know, Narcissa said. I'm not offering it as currency. I'm telling you that I know what you are. Her eyes were very direct on his. She was, Harry thought, probably the most courageous person in this room in some specific and underappreciated way, the courage not of combat but of clarity, of a woman who had made her choices and was willing to stand in the exact shape they had given her. I know what you're trying to do. And I know the difference between power being used for domination and power being used as, she searched for the word, as a frame. Something to hold a new thing in place while it sets. That's a good description, Harry said, meaning it. I'm asking you, Narcissa said quietly, for my son. Not his protection, I'm not asking you to shield him from consequences. I'm asking you to see him as something other than a Malfoy. She glanced at Draco, who was standing very still with something working across his face that was either pride or shame or the specific intersection of both. He has been trained to be his father's legacy since birth. He doesn't know yet what he is when he isn't that. She looked back at Harry. I think you might be the only person in a position to let him find out. The room held that. Draco made a sound that wasn't quite words, something short and complicated that he swallowed before it became anything specific. He sat back down. He looked at his hands. Lucius Malfoy had gone completely still. What are you asking me to do? Harry said to Narcissa. Nothing yet, she said. I'm just asking you to leave the door open. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. The door's open, he said. The storm broke outside around noon, the rain arriving with a suddenness that made the tall windows shudder and turned the manicured Malfoy lawns into rivers in minutes. Nobody in the room moved toward the windows. Nobody suggested adjourning. What happened next happened because Rodolphus-Lestrange made a mistake. It was a small mistake, the kind that comes from being under pressure for 3 hours in a situation that offers no good outcomes. He reached into his robe, not for a wand, Harry would learn later from Ron who had been watching, for a document he'd apparently brought with him, a legal counter-instrument that his solicitor had prepared. An emergency challenge to the Slytherin inheritance certification. But Ron didn't know that. What Ron saw was Rodolphus-Lestrange reaching into his robe inside Malfoy Manor, and Ron's response was the response of someone who had spent years training his threat assessment to be very fast and very unambiguous. Wand out. Ron shouted, and had his own in hand in the same breath. The room exploded. Not with spells, not immediately. With movement. Rabastan was on his feet before the shout had died. Lucius had his wand drawn in a movement so smooth and automatic that Harry suspected it was the product of a lifetime of instinct. Neville had his wand pointed at Rabastan from across the room. Hermione had hers at Rodolphus. And Harry hadn't drawn his wand. He was standing in the exact center of the room with his hands at his sides and the Merlin ring pulsing with a light that was now visible, that deep bronze luminescence brightening slowly in the charged air, and the quality of the magic in the room was doing something that had nothing to do with any individual spell. It was the atmospheric shift of several complex magical fields pressing against each other in a very small space, and it felt like the moment before a thunderclap when the air itself seems to stop. Put them down, Harry said. He said it quietly. He said it in the same unhurried tone he'd used all morning, the tone that had no anger or urgency in it because it had no need for anger or urgency, because there was something underneath the words that made the words unnecessary and the words were just the human-facing part of a much larger message. Rabastan's wand lowered first. Then Lucius's, slowly, the control visible in every millimeter of the motion. Ron held his for another 3 seconds, then dropped it to his side. Neville last, because Neville was the most stubborn person Harry knew when he decided something was a threat. Rodolphus slowly withdrew his hand from his robe and produced a folded piece of parchment, which he held up for the room to see. "Legal document," he said, in a voice that was carefully flat. Harry looked at it. "Set it on the table," Harry said. "We'll look at it in a minute." Rodolphus set it down. The light in Harry's ring faded back to its resting pulse. The room exhaled. Ron looked at Harry from across the room. "Sorry," his eyes said. Harry gave a tiny shake of his head. "Not your fault." Hermione had moved to the table and picked up Rodolphus's document before the room had fully settled. She scanned it in the sharp, rapid way that meant she was reading it 3 times simultaneously. Her expression shifted through several stages. "It's a certification challenge," she said. "Based on the argument that the Slytherin secondary bloodline can't be validated without a primary line consent mechanism that, Oh, that's actually clever." She looked up. "This would have worked in 1820. But not now?" Harry asked. "The Gringotts Arbitration Act of 1831 superseded the consent mechanism requirement for extinct primary lines." She set the document down. "The challenge doesn't hold." Rodolphus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in a tone that was neither hostile nor warm, just honest, "You're extraordinary." "I know," Hermione said. "The kneeling happened at 1:30. It wasn't planned. Not by Harry, he hadn't come here with kneeling as a goal, hadn't structured the morning around it as a destination. It emerged from the room's logic the way some outcomes emerge, not because anyone chose it as an ending but because everything else had been followed to its honest conclusion. It was Lucius who moved first. He stood near the fireplace, and he'd been standing very still for the last 40 minutes, listening, while the legal arguments concluded and Hermione dismantled the certification challenge and the rain hammered the windows and the room found its new alignment. He stood there with his cane in his hand and his face carrying the expression of a man reviewing the complete picture of something he'd spent 30 years building and seeing it, finally, for what it was. Then he set his cane against the mantelpiece. He took one step forward from the fireplace. And he went to one knee on the marble floor of his own receiving room. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was the opposite of theatrical. It was so quiet and so controlled and so utterly deliberate that it hit the room harder than any theatrical gesture could have. Lucius Malfoy's knee on the floor of Malfoy Manor, before a 17-year-old boy he had spent years trying to have killed. His head slightly bowed. Not abject, not broken, the posture of a man who had assessed the situation with complete precision and had chosen the only position that allowed him to survive it with any intelligence. But it was still a kneel. Narcissa didn't hesitate. She moved to stand beside her husband and went to one knee in one fluid motion, not an imitation of Lucius's calculation, but something completely different. Hers was a choice. It said, "This is where my loyalty lands, and I am not ashamed of it." The Lestranges took longer. Rabastin made a sound in his throat that was pure resistance, the sound of a man whose entire identity was built on a hierarchy being asked to invert it. He looked at his brother. Rodolphus was already reading Harry's face, doing the same calculation Lucius had done and arriving at the same terminal mathematics. The war was lost, the power structure was collapsing, and the person standing in front of them had 3 times the legal authority of anyone else in Wizarding Britain and magic to back it up. Rodolphus knelt. Not with grace, with the particular resignation of someone doing something they've decided to do rather than something they want to. Rabastin remained standing for another 10 seconds. Harry counted them, not impatiently, just observing. Then Rabastin knelt, and the line of his shoulders said everything that his face was refusing to. The silence was complete. Harry looked at the people on the floor in front of him and felt none of the triumph he might have expected. What he felt was something more like the weight of it, the actual, physical sense of what it meant for these people to be in this position, the decades of history compressed into the room, the cost of it for all of them in different ways. Lucius's dignity bent but not broken. Narcissa's absolute clarity. The Lestrange brothers structured fury. And then he looked at Draco. Draco was standing by the window, not kneeling, not having moved, and his face had finally stopped doing the split thing. It had arrived somewhere, not peace, not resolution, but a kind of stripped-down exposure, all the Malfoy performance gone, just a 17-year-old boy standing in his family's receiving room watching the world his parents built rearrange itself around a choice he hadn't made yet. "You don't have to," Harry said. Quietly, only to Draco. Draco looked at him. His jaw was working. His eyes were doing something complicated and private. "I know," Draco said. A long moment. "I know," Draco said again, softer. And he went to one knee. Not because Harry had demanded it. Not because the law required it or his parents had. Because he'd looked at everything in the room and chosen it, chosen the acknowledgement, chosen the starting over, chosen the door Narcissa had asked Harry to leave open. Harry stood with 5 people kneeling in front of him and looked at the rings on his hands and thought of his letter to Sirius, folded in his jacket pocket. "I'm trying to figure out if those two things can both be true at the same time." "Get up," he said. They rose. "The property matters conclude on schedule per the Gringotts timeline," Harry said, his voice back to business, to the moving forward that was the only direction that mattered now. "Hermione will coordinate with your solicitors. Lucius," he met the man's eyes, "the criminal referral is proceeding. That process isn't yours or mine to stop. I won't argue for leniency, but I won't argue against it either. What you did at Hogwarts in 1992 is what the Wizengamot will determine it to be." Lucius met his gaze. He nodded once. "Draco," Harry said. Draco looked at him. "Come to Hogwarts in September." A beat of silence. "I wasn't sure Draco started. "Come to Hogwarts," Harry said. "That's all. Come back, finish your education. What happens after that is up to you." Draco looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was unfamiliar and might, possibly, have been something close to relief. "All right," he said. Harry picked up his rucksack from the floor where he'd set it on arrival. He looked at the room, the fire, the tapestries, the enormous rainy windows, the Malfoy family standing in the middle of their own receiving room looking like people who have just survived a controlled demolition of everything they thought they knew. "Right," Harry said. "We're done here." He walked to the door. His people fell in behind him without being asked, Ron first, shoulder brushing his, the warmth of someone who had been in every version of this fight from the very beginning. Hermione next, satchel repacked and over her shoulder, already thinking 3 moves ahead, he could tell from the small vertical line between her brows. Neville behind, his long-bottom robes carrying something different now than they had this morning, a weight that had settled rather than pressed. Luna last, drifting slightly to the left, carrying her small bag with the peacock still watching her curiously from outside as they passed the window. Harry paused at the door. He turned back, just once. Lucius Malfoy was standing by the mantelpiece with his cane in hand, watching him go. The expression on his face had changed from this morning, not softened, not defeated, but recalibrated. The face of someone who had updated his model of the world and was already, quietly, adapting to the new coordinates. "The Northern Estate solicitor will need to contact Ragnarok at Gringotts directly," Harry said. "Not a ministry intermediary. Ragnarok's office." "I understand," Lucius said. Harry nodded. And walked out of Malfoy Manor into the rain, which had softened while they were inside to something almost gentle, pattering on the white peacock's feathers and running along the gravel drive in silver threads. Ron fell in beside him. "How do you feel?" Harry considered the question honestly. "Like I've started something," he said. "Not finished it." "The Lestranges are going to be a problem," Ron said. "Yes. And Lucius is already working out how to make the property transfers benefit him somehow." "Probably," Harry said. "And Draco is going to be absolutely unbearable at Hogwarts." "Almost certainly." Ron nodded. "Good," he said, with the tone of someone who finds complicated problems fundamentally more interesting than simple ones. Boring otherwise. Harry looked back once more at the Manor's facade, all that stone and history and weight, standing against the grey Wiltshire sky. Enormous. Immovable. And yet, something had shifted inside it today that wouldn't shift back. He turned forward and walked toward the gates. Chapter 4, The Fracture. 3 days after Malfoy Manor, Draco Malfoy showed up at the burrow. He came alone, which told Harry more than anything Draco could have said. No owl in advance, no formal notice, no Malfoy solicitor writing point. Just Draco at the garden gate at 7 in the morning, wearing plain dark robes that were still obviously expensive but lacked every piece of house ornamentation, his wand in his hand because he wasn't stupid enough to walk up to a Weasley property without it, and an expression that was trying very hard to look like it wasn't asking for anything. Harry was in the garden when he arrived, which was where Harry had taken to spending his early mornings since the Gringotts visit. He was working through something with the Merlin ring, a quality of casting he was still learning to trust, an ease that felt different from power and was, he was starting to understand, more like fluency. He'd been practicing nonverbal shield work, and the shields were coming out harder and cleaner than anything he'd managed before, hanging in the morning air like geometric facts. He heard the gate and turned. Draco stood there with the morning light behind him and said nothing for a moment. He looked at Harry's practice shields, which were still visible, faintly luminous in the low light, and then looked at Harry, and said, "I need to talk to you." Harry cancelled the shields with a gesture and said, "Come in, then." Draco looked at the burrow. Something crossed his face that was somewhere between discomfort and fascination, the expression of someone encountering a category of house they had always been told was lesser and finding that lesser turned out to mean warm and real and full of things that matter. "Is Weasley going to hex me?" Draco asked. "Probably not," Harry said. "Ron, I mean. Fred and George are different, but they're not here." "Right." Draco came through the gate. They sat in the garden on an old bench that had been repaired so many times with magic that its wood was more charm than timber at this point. Molly Weasley brought tea out 10 minutes later with the particular expression of a woman who has strong feelings about a situation but has decided that the feelings and the tea are separate matters. She set the tray down, looked at Draco for a long moment, and said nothing. Which was, for Molly Weasley, an enormous statement. Draco wrapped both hands around his cup and said, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." "All right," Harry said. "I knew, second year, that it was my father." Draco's voice was flat and controlled and working hard to stay that way. "He didn't tell me what he put in Weasley's cauldron. But I knew it was from him, and I knew it was dark, and he stopped. "I knew Ginny Weasley was going to the hospital wing every other week and I knew something was very wrong and I didn't say anything." He looked at the tea. "I was 12. I told myself that made it not my fault. That I was 12 and I didn't know exactly what it was. But I knew something. I chose not to know more." Harry was quiet. He let the word sit. "I'm not telling you this so I don't want absolution," Draco said, with a flash of the old irritation that was almost reassuring in its familiarity. "I'm not here asking for that. He stopped again. The sentence seemed to be located somewhere he wasn't quite sure how to reach. "In that room, on Thursday. When you said you wanted me to make a real choice." He looked at Harry. "This is me doing that. Saying the thing I've been not saying for 5 years. Does it feel different?" Harry asked. Draco seemed to actually consider the question, which was new. "Yes. Worse. And also, a pause. Cleaner." "Yeah," Harry said. "It usually works like that." They sat for a moment with the morning moving around them, the sounds of the burrow waking up filtering through the kitchen windows, Molly moving between stovetop and table, someone upstairs dropping something with a thud that was probably Ron. "What do you actually want to do?" Harry asked. "Not what your family wants. Not what the situation requires. What do you want?" Draco looked at him as if the question was slightly exotic, which, Harry supposed, it probably was for someone who'd been raised in the Malfoy household's particular tradition of wanting what was strategic. "I want to be a healer," Draco said. It came out quietly, like something said quickly before the door closed again. "I've wanted it since third year. I'm good at potions and I'm good at charm work, and there are things the healers at St. Mungo's are getting wrong because half of them haven't updated their training since 1970 and," he caught himself. The familiar Malfoy certainty had slipped through for a moment before he reeled it back in. "My father thinks it's a career for," he stopped that sentence entirely. "My father has opinions." "Do his opinions matter?" Harry asked. Draco opened his mouth. Closed it. And that, more than anything, was the answer. "Hermione knows a healer at St. Mungo's," Harry said. "She can introduce you, if you want. After September, after Hogwarts." Draco looked at him. The expression on his face had several layers that Harry recognized from his own mirror, the complicated feeling of receiving something straightforward from a direction you expected to receive nothing. "Why are you being like this?" Draco said. "Like what?" "Like," a gesture that seemed to encompass Harry's entire manner, "helpful." "Without any," another gesture, "without any sting in it." "Because there's no point in the sting," Harry said simply. Draco stared at the garden for a while. Then, "I hated you for 6 years. I know. Most of it was because you had something I could see but couldn't name." Harry looked at him sideways. "You had people," Draco said. "Actual people. Weasley and Granger. They weren't," he seemed to be choosing his words with care. "The people around me were there because of my family's name. Yours were there because of you. I didn't know that was a thing you could have." He paused. "I think I hated you for having it." Harry thought about 6 years of Draco's particular brand of cruelty, the quality of it, the specific targets, the places it kept returning to. He thought about that cruelty in a different light now, one that made it less simple. "Well," Harry said, "you can have that too. It's not a limited resource." Draco made a sound that might, if the light was right, have been the ghost of a laugh. "You're absurd," he said. But the word had no malice in it at all. Ron's reaction to finding Draco in his family's garden, drinking his mother's tea, was to stand in the kitchen doorway for a full 15 seconds in silence, which was unusual for Ron. Then he said, "If you've come to be a spy, I want you to know I will hex you into next Tuesday without losing sleep over it." "I know," Draco said. "I've always known you would." Ron looked at him. "Was that a compliment?" "An acknowledgement," Draco said. Ron processed this. Then he came outside, poured himself tea, and sat on the garden wall across from them. The three of them existed in the same space for several minutes without anyone doing anything, which was its own kind of progress. Hermione arrived an hour later, having apparat from her parents' house where she'd been spending the night to brief them on developments that she described to Harry as going about as well as expected, which is to say with concern and love and a lot of questions about why I can't just be a solicitor. She came through the back gate with her satchel and stopped at the sight of Draco. She looked at Harry. Harry lifted one shoulder. "He came here himself." Hermione sat down at the garden table, opened her satchel, and said to Draco, without preamble, "I need to know which Slytherin families your father has contact with who might cooperate with intelligence sharing." Draco blinked. "Good morning to you too, Granger." "Good morning," she said, without looking up from her notebook. "Which families?" Draco looked at Harry. Harry looked back with an expression that said, "I warned you about her, and also she's right, though." "The Greengrasses are the most likely," Draco said, after a moment. "Daphne's father has always been uncomfortable with the Dark Lord's methods. He wanted pure-blood social preference, not blood purges. There's a distinction he draws between those two things that I think is morally bankrupt but practically useful." He paused. "The Knots might cooperate under pressure. Zabini's family operates independently of the movement, always have. they're purebloods for social reasons, not ideological ones. Hermione was writing at speed. What about the Parkinson family? Draco's mouth tightened. Pansy's father is deeply committed. But Pansy isn't. A pause. Pansy is very good at being whatever the room requires, Draco said carefully. It's not commitment, it's performance of commitment. She's scared. Most of them are, they're just better than me at hiding it. He seemed to catch himself on the better than me, reassess it, and leave it where it landed. This is useful, Hermione said, still writing. I'm glad my 5 years of unwilling proximity to Death Eaters is useful to you, Draco said, with a flash of his old dryness that came out differently now, self-deprecating rather than superior. Extremely, Hermione said, and looked up. Thank you. Draco looked faintly thrown by the directness of the gratitude. Right, he said. The letter from Bellatrix arrived that afternoon. Harry knew it was from Bellatrix before he opened it, because the owl that delivered it was not an owl. It was a large black crow with yellow eyes that arrived on the Burrow's kitchen windowsill and regarded everyone in the room with an intelligence that felt personal. It deposited the letter on the table, ignored the treat that Molly reflexively offered it, and left the way it came. Everyone stared at the letter for a moment. The envelope was black. No seal. The handwriting was Bellatrix's. Harry had seen it on documents in the pensive memories, and it was immediately recognizable. Large, aggressive strokes that went slightly beyond the boundaries of what the space required, as if the letters themselves were impatient to be elsewhere. Harry picked it up and opened it. Potter, you performed adequately in the Manor. My husband and brother-in-law are, predictably, rattled. Lucius is already adapting, which is the most Lucius thing imaginable. I, however, am not rattled. I am interested. You think you know what I am. You've heard the stories, Azkaban, the Longbottoms, Black. You've decided I'm a category, fanatic, monster, lost cause, and filed me there because it's tidier than the alternative. I wonder if you're brave enough to consider the alternative. I want to meet you. Without an audience. I want to know if you're actually what the rings suggest or if the magic simply ran out of better options. If you're afraid, don't come. If you're not, you know how to find me. BLPS. I know where your Horcruxes are. 3 of them. I want to tell you in person. I have conditions. Harry read it twice. Then he set it on the table. The kitchen had gone absolutely still. Hermione, who had read it over his shoulder, said, no. 3 Horcruxes, Harry said. She could be lying. She could be, Harry said. Or she genuinely knows and the conditions are her attempting to negotiate a position before everything collapses. He looked at the letter. She said Lucius is adapting. She's been watching what happened at the Manor and she's made an assessment that it's real. Bellatrix-Lestrange is a lot of things, but she's not, she's a murderer, Ron said flatly, from the doorway. He had his arms folded and his expression was the one he wore when something cost him to say but he was going to say it anyway. She murdered Sirius. She tortured Neville's parents into what they are. She tortured Hermione he stopped. I know what she knows might matter. I'm not pretending I don't know that. I'm just saying what she is. I know what she is, Harry said quietly. I know better than anyone what she is. The silence had a particular texture now, the weight of Sirius's name in the room, which never got lighter, and the weight of Hermione's scar on her arm, and the weight of Neville's parents in St. Mungo's, sitting in a ward that had become their whole world. All of it present, all of it real. Draco, who had stayed after the morning's conversation and had been quietly helping Hermione cross-reference her documents at the kitchen table, said nothing. He was looking at the letter with an expression Harry couldn't read fully, complicated, private, turned inward. She won't be arrested coming to meet me, Harry said. That's one of the conditions, probably. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. I'll think about it. Harry, Hermione started. "I'll think about it," he said again, and there was something in his voice that ended the argument before it became one, not a shutdown, but a commitment. He was going to think about it seriously and carefully, and he wasn't going to make a reckless decision, and they all knew that about him now in a way they hadn't always known it, so they let it rest. He thought about it for 2 days. In that time, 3 things happened that made the letters offer more urgent. The first, a Death Eater attack on a wizarding family in Yorkshire. The Patil cousins, not Parvati and Padma, a different branch of the family, whose home was attacked at 3 in the morning. 2 of them were killed. The dark mark was raised over the ruins. Harry heard about it from Arthur, who came home from the ministry grey-faced, and sat in his kitchen with his hands around a cold cup of tea until Molly quietly reheated it and sat beside him. The second, Scrimgeour sent a formal request, not a summons. He was apparently smart enough not to try that again, for a meeting to discuss how the Lordship Authority might be coordinated with ministry operations. Harry read the request and found it fundamentally more interesting than the previous minister's approach, and also fundamentally more dangerous. Scrimgeour was trying to bring Harry inside the ministry structure. To make him an instrument of the existing power rather than the thing it had to adjust to. Harry wrote back politely and said he'd be in touch, which was true and also meaningless. The third thing, Neville came to Harry and told him, quietly, in the Burrow's back garden, that he'd been to visit his parents at St. Mungo's. Harry had been there once. He knew the ward, knew the quality of the stillness in it, the particular heartbreak of the Longbottoms sitting in their corner making no connection with the world except the faint pleasure they found in sweet wrappers. "Mum gave me a sweet wrapper," Neville said. He was looking at the garden, not at Harry. "She always does. I've kept every one. I don't know why, it's not nothing," Harry said. "No," Neville agreed. "It's not." He was quiet for a moment. "I want them back, Harry. I want whoever is responsible for what was done to them to be held responsible. Not killed. I don't want revenge in the way that means hurting someone. I want them to have to face it. I want Bellatrix-Lestrange to have to stand in a room and look at what she did." A long pause. "Is that something that could happen?" Harry looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "I think it could. Through the lordship process." "Through whatever process gets it done," Harry said. Neville nodded slowly. "Then when you meet her," he said, "because I know you're going to, I can see it in your face, I want you to do something for me." "What?" "Tell her I remember everything," Neville said. "I remember every single thing." Harry sent his reply to Bellatrix that evening. It was short. Name the place and time. No ministry involvement. You have an hour. He hesitated, then added a fourth line, bring the real information or don't come. The Crow came back within 3 hours with a location and a time, 2 days hence, a safe house in a part of London that had been magically obscured from the city around it for decades. Harry told Hermione. She spent 4 hours building the most comprehensive pre-meeting intelligence file Harry had ever seen, Bellatrix's known magical capabilities, her known hexes and curses, the psychological profile that Hermione had constructed from 5 years of research and observation that was, frankly, more detailed than anything the Ministry had. She also, at the end of it, sat down across from Harry and said, very directly, "You know there's a version of this where she's using Horcrux information as bait to get you into a position where she can deliver you to Voldemort." "Yes," Harry said. "And you're going anyway." "The Horcrux information matters more than the risk," Harry said. "If it's real." "If it's real," Hermione said. "Harry, she killed." "I know," Harry said. "Hermione." He looked at her. "I know. I know exactly who she is and what she's done, and I'm not going there to forgive her or to rehabilitate her I'm going because she has information I need and because I think there's something happening with Bellatrix that isn't just bait." He paused. "You've read her letter. She said she's interested. Bellatrix-Lestrange has spent 30 years being a fanatic, not a strategist. Something has changed." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "Take me with you," she said. "No. Harry," the letter said without an audience, Harry said. "If I walk in with backup, she'll know I'm managing her, and the moment she knows that, anything she's genuinely willing to offer closes." He met Hermione's eyes. "I'll be back." She looked at him with the expression she got when she hated the logic of something but couldn't defeat it. She pulled out her wand and held it up. "Emergency port key," she said, and pointed it at his jacket button. "If I don't hear from you in 90 minutes, I'm coming regardless." Harry looked down at his jacket button. "Fine. Don't say fine like it's a small thing." "Thank you," Harry said. She lowered her wand. "Come back," she said. "Always," Harry said, with a half-smile that was meant to lighten things and mostly succeeded. The safe house was in Shoreditch, behind a Muggle pub that had closed down 4 years ago and never been reopened. The magical concealment was extremely good, 3 layers of notice-me-not charms and a muffliato that covered the whole building, professionally maintained, well past anything amateur. Someone had been using this place as a serious operational base. Harry found the entrance on the first try, following the rings, which he was increasingly learning to trust the way you learn to trust your own sense of direction, a door that presented as a boarded-up fire exit and yielded when he touched it with the hand wearing the Slytherin ring. Inside, a long room. Low ceiling. A table, 2 chairs, a lamp that burned with the same blue flame quality as the Gringotts corridors. No windows. Bellatrix was already there. Harry had been mentally preparing for this, had spent 2 days building his internal relationship with what she was and what she'd done and what this meeting was for, so that none of it would make him stupid or reckless or afraid. He thought he'd prepared adequately. Bellatrix-Lestrange in person, outside of battle, sitting across a table in the blue lamplight, was different from what he'd prepared for. She was still the person from his nightmares, the wild dark hair, the sharp angular face, the eyes that went too deep and burned too bright. But she was also, sitting there, a person. Not performing. Not laughing or shrieking or throwing curses. Just sitting. Watching him come in with the quality of attention that was, he realized, what her letter had been, precise. Focused. Interested. He sat across from her. She looked at the rings immediately. Her eyes moved across them with the expression of a scholar evaluating evidence, and Harry saw something happen in her face that was neither the exultance of a fanatic nor the calculation of an opportunist. What he saw was something more like recognition. Something like awe, though Bellatrix-Lestrange would presumably have cut her own hand off before admitting to awe. "They're real," she said. "Did you think they wouldn't be?" "I thought they might be fabricated," she said. "There are people in the ministry capable of staging an inheritance claim. I didn't think Gringotts would validate a fake, but," she looked at the Merlin ring. "Merlin's seal can't be faked. Not that." A pause. "It's pulsing. It does that. It only does that for the genuine holder." She leaned back in her chair. In the lamplight her face looked older than Harry expected, worn thin in a way that Azkaban put on people and time didn't fix. "I've read everything written about Merlin's seal." It responded to 2 people in documented history, Merlin himself and a woman named Alditha of Gloucester in the 12th century, who used it to end a war that would otherwise have killed every magical person in England. She paused. "That's what the seal is for. Ending things that are going to kill everyone." "That's a useful thing to know," Harry said. "I thought so." She reached into her robe and produced a piece of parchment, folded 3 times, and set it on the table between them. She didn't push it toward him. Left it in the neutral space. 3 Horcruxes, she said. "I know their locations because I was present when 2 of them were placed, and the Dark Lord, he trusted me with his plans in ways he trusted no one else." Something crossed her face when she said that, something complicated and old and not entirely comfortable. "He told me things. He told me because I was his most devoted servant and because he believed I would never use what he told me against him." Why are you using it against him? Harry asked. Bellatrix looked at him for a long, steady moment. When she answered, her voice was completely level, stripped of every performance. Because he ordered the death of my nephew, she said. The room was very quiet. Draco, Harry said. He ordered Draco to murder Dumbledore, she said. As a punishment to Lucius. A 17-year-old boy, sent to do something no 17-year-old should be sent to do, with the expectation that he would fail so that his failure could be used to dispose of the entire Malfoy family. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were steady. I have followed the Dark Lord since I was 17 years old. I believed in everything he stood for. I have done things, a pause, something moving behind her eyes that was very old and very dark. I have done things that are past forgiveness and I know that. I don't want forgiveness. I want Draco to be alive when this ends. Harry looked at her for a long time. You tortured the Longbottoms into living death, he said. Quietly, without heat. Just the fact, placed on the table. Yes, she said. Neville asked me to tell you he remembers everything. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not guilt, not exactly, something more like the look of a person who has a debt they know can never be cleared and is choosing to look at it directly rather than away. I know he does, she said. He wants you to face it, Harry said. Not to be punished in some abstract ministry sense. To stand in front of what you did and face it. Bellatrix was quiet for a moment. Is that a condition of your cooperation? She asked. It's a condition of the world making any kind of sense after all this, Harry said. Yeah. Something moved across her face that he couldn't name. Not agreement, not refusal. Something more like a person taking a very heavy thing onto their shoulders and deciding to carry it rather than put it down. The 3 Horcruxes, she said, and pushed the parchment toward him. Harry picked it up and opened it. 3 locations. 3 objects. Detailed, specific, cross-referenced with dates and places he could verify. His eyes moved quickly across it and his mind moved faster, connecting the information to everything he already knew, and the picture that assembled was complete in a way it had never been before. The path to the end of the war, which had been a maze, was showing him its architecture. He looked up. The conditions, he said. What are they? 3, she said. First, immunity from ministry prosecution until after the war ends. Not a pardon. Not an erasure. I know what I've done and I know what comes after. But I need to be functional until it's over. A pause. Second, Draco is protected. Whatever happens to the Malfoy family through your legal processes, Draco is not prosecuted for what he was ordered to do. That was already my position, Harry said. She looked at him. I know. I wanted to hear you say it. And the third? Harry asked. Bellatrix looked at him with those 2 deep eyes in the blue lamplight, and said something he hadn't expected. Teach me, she said. He stared. The way you're using the Merlin authority, she said, and for a moment the scholar in her voice overrode everything else, it isn't just political. It's magical. You're doing something with ancient casting that I've only ever seen described in texts most people think are myths. I want to understand it. Not to use it against you. Because, she stopped, and what came out next was perhaps the most honest thing Harry had ever heard Bellatrix Lestrange say, because I have been the Dark Lord's weapon for my entire adult life and I don't know who I am without a cause to serve, and this, she looked at the rings, this looks like a cause worth serving. Harry sat with that for a long moment. She looked back at him without flinching, without performing, without the theatrical devotion she'd aimed at Voldemort for 30 years. Just a woman of 40-odd who was tired down to her bones, who had done terrible things for terrible reasons and was sitting across from the person those things had hurt most and asking, in the only language she knew, which was the language of use and capability and power, to be something different. Harry thought about what Ron would say. He thought about what Neville had asked him. He thought about the letter in his pocket addressed to Sirius. The first two conditions I can work with, he said. The third, I'll think about it. That's not a no, she said. No, Harry agreed. It's not. He was back at the Burrow in 78 minutes. Hermione was in the kitchen when he walked in, sitting at the table with her wand in her hand and her jacket on and her satchel over her shoulder, ready to leave. She looked at his face when he came through the door and her expression moved through 3 stages very quickly. You have information, she said. Yes. And she's not, it wasn't a trap. No. Hermione let out a long breath and set her wand on the table. What happened? He sat down. He told her. All of it, the Horcrux information, the conditions, Draco's name as the hinge on which Bellatrix had turned, the third condition. He left nothing out, because Hermione was his strategist and his conscience and his best analytical mind, and this was too important to manage. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The Horcrux information, she said finally. Can you verify it? The first 2 locations, yes. We can verify them from what we already know. The third, he paused. I think it's real, Hermione. I think she's telling the truth. I think so too, she said, which surprised him. He raised an eyebrow. I read her letter 6 times, Hermione said. There's no strategic reason to offer information you could use as leverage in exchange for something as vague as immunity and a promise to protect her nephew. If she were playing a long game she'd have structured the trade differently. What she offered is what she has, it's not a calculated exchange, it's a desperate one. A pause. She loves Draco the way your mother loved you. Harry looked at her. In a completely irrational, overrides everything, he'll tear down the world way, Hermione said. The most dangerous kind of love there is. And the most honest kind. Harry was quiet for a moment. The third condition, he said. Hermione picked up her wand. Set it down. Picked it up again. She wants to stop being a weapon, she said. Yes. She wants to start being a person. I think so. Teaching her it's giving her access to the Merlin magic. Effectively. Whatever she learns from watching you work with it, I know, Harry said. I know all the reasons it's dangerous. He looked at the table. I also think there's a version of this where the most powerful dark witch in living memory is standing on the right side of the war. Not as a weapon. As a choice. Hermione was quiet for a long, serious time. Ron is going to hate this, she said finally. Yeah. Neville is going to, I don't know what Neville is going to do. Neither do I, Harry admitted. And you're going to tell them both everything, the way you just told me. Of course, Harry said. Hermione looked at him. Good, she said. Then, after more actions, write the next chapter now. Chapter 5, The Lord's Peace. The Great Hall of Hogwarts looked different at dawn. Harry had seen it in every condition, full of students and noise and floating candles, empty and echoing on Christmas morning, lit by green fire and screaming during the worst night of his life. But he'd never seen it like this, the long tables pushed to the walls, the floor cleared, morning light coming through the enchanted ceiling which had gone silver-gray to match the actual sky outside, and the whole enormous space holding the particular quiet of a place that knows something important is about to happen inside it. He'd arrived 2 hours before anyone else. He needed that. He needed the building. Hogwarts knew him, he was increasingly certain of it. Not in a mystical, speaking castle way, but in the practical way of a place that held his blood and his history in its stones. He'd bled on these floors. He'd grown up in these corridors in the way that mattered more than biology, in the way of a person finding out who they are in a specific geography that can't be replicated. The rings on his fingers were warm the moment he crossed the threshold, warm in a different way than usual, as if whatever old magic lived in the castle and whatever old magic lived in the lordships were recognizing each other. He walked the length of the empty great hall twice, slowly, feeling the space. Then he stood in the center of it and closed his eyes and reached through the Merlin ring in the way he'd been learning for 3 weeks, not reaching for power, exactly, but reaching for alignment. For the thing Ragnarok had meant when he said the seal had spent 1100 years waiting for someone whose magical signature matched. The hall breathed around him. That was the only way he could describe it, a slow, deep, structural exhale, as if the building had been holding its breath for longer than his lifetime. He opened his eyes. He was ready. They came in over the course of the morning. Hermione and Ron arrived together at 7, having apparat to the Hogwarts gates and walked up through the grounds in the early light. Ron had his expression on, the one Harry recognized as Ron having done his thinking somewhere private and arrived at a position, and the position was, I'm here, I'm in, and let's finish this. Hermione had the satchel and the look of someone who had been awake since 4 preparing contingencies, which she confirmed by immediately producing 3 separate plans of action from her bag and beginning a rapid briefing that Harry listened to with full attention. Neville arrived at 7:30 with Augusta Longbottom, which Harry hadn't expected. The old woman swept into the great hall in formal robes of grey and silver and surveyed the space with the quality of attention of someone taking military inventory. She looked at Harry for a long moment, looked at the rings, and then said, in a voice that carried the weight of a family's 40 years of waiting, "Do not waste this." "I don't intend to," Harry said. Augusta looked at him for another beat. Then she gave a single, precise nod and took a position near the wall with the air of someone who has decided where they stand and has no plans to move. Luna arrived with her father, who was wearing his most extraordinary hat and who had brought a copy of the Quibbler with a headline Harry glimpsed that read Potter claims 3 ancient lordships. The Nargles were right all along. He found a spot near the doors and began, apparently, to write live commentary. Draco arrived at 8. He came alone again. He was wearing plain dark robes again, and he stood in the doorway of the great hall for a moment looking at the cleared floor and the morning light and Harry standing in the center of it, and something worked across his face that Harry had seen once before, the expression Draco had worn when he talked about wanting to be a healer, the expression of someone arriving at a life they might actually want. He walked in and crossed to where Harry stood. "My mother sends her support," Draco said. "And your father?" Harry asked. Draco's jaw moved. "My father sends his," a pause, acknowledgement that the outcome he considers most likely is the correct one. "That's Lucius's way of saying he hopes I win," Harry said. "Yes," Draco said, which cost him something. Harry could see it cost him something, and that was fine. Some things should cost something. "It is." Harry nodded. "I'm glad you're here." Draco looked at him. "I'm not here because of the lordships," he said. "I'm here because," he stopped. The sentence required a kind of honesty that was still relatively new for him. "Because this is the thing happening in the world and I've spent 17 years being on the wrong side of things happening in the world, and I'm done." He looked at the cleared floor. "Also because if something goes wrong he stopped again. "I just want to be here." "Good," Harry said simply. The Wizengamot observers arrived between 8 and 9, 14 members who had received Harry's formal notice invoking the ancient dueling protocol's witness requirement. Among them was Amelia Bones, solid and deliberate as ever, who took a position near the head of the room with the look of a woman who has spent her career trying to make the law mean something and is watching either her best day or her worst one arrive. Scrimgeour came in at 5 to 9. He looked at Harry in the center of the floor and stopped walking for a moment. Then he continued to his position along the wall with the minister's particular economy of visible emotion. At 9 o'clock, the Hogwarts doors opened. Voldemort entered alone. Harry had expected a procession, Death Eaters arrayed behind him, the theater of power that the Dark Lord had always preferred. Instead there was just the man himself, which was either confidence or a message about what kind of encounter this was going to be. Probably both. Tom Riddle was tall, spare, and had not been fully human for a very long time. The red eyes, the flat nostrils, the chalk-white skin that didn't sit right on the bones beneath it, the body of someone who had done things to themselves that the body kept trying to reject and failing. He moved across the great hall with the quality of someone who owned every room he entered because he had decided that ownership was about certainty and he had never been uncertain. He stopped 20 feet from Harry. He looked at the rings. Something moved through his face, not fear, because Voldemort's relationship with fear was so thoroughly inverted that standard readings didn't apply. But something. A sharpening. A reassessment. "Harry Potter," he said. The voice still had that quality of being too smooth, like water with something wrong underneath. "Tom," Harry said. The name hit the room the way it always did. The Wizengamot observers stirred. Amelia Bones's expression didn't change, but her grip on her wand tightened visibly. Scrimgeour didn't react at all, which meant he'd prepared himself for it. Voldemort's nostrils flared, very slightly. "You've been busy," he said. "Little bit," Harry said. The legal theater was impressive, Voldemort said, and his tone was the tone of someone being professionally generous about an opponent's work. The Wizengamot maneuvers, the Malfoy visit. The Gringotts certification. He tilted his head. "You've understood something most people take decades to learn." "What's that?" Harry asked. "That power isn't taken," Voldemort said. "It's structured. It requires foundations. Architecture." A pause. "We're alike in that, you and I." "We're not alike," Harry said pleasantly. "No." The red eyes moved over him with something that was almost curiosity. "You hold the Slytherin inheritance." "My inheritance." "You've built a political structure designed to outlast the current conflict. You've been ruthless in your application of legal authority, I've been precise," Harry said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "The Lestranges knelt to you. The Malfoys knelt to you. You've dismantled 400 years of established structure in 3 weeks." Voldemort's voice was level and interested. "That's not the action of a boy who wants to be left alone." "No," Harry agreed. "It's not." "Then what do you want, Harry?" And there was something almost genuine in the question, the curiosity of a man who had spent 16 years defining Harry as a problem to be solved and was, possibly for the first time, looking at him as something else. "I want what I've always wanted," Harry said. "For people to be safe. For the people who've been hurt because of you to get to live their lives." He paused. "For this to end." "Noble," Voldemort said, with the quality of the word that made it mean its opposite. "Efficient," Harry said. "Noble is for speeches. I'm just telling you what's true." Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "The challenge. The rings. You understand what I'm here to argue, that the Slytherin inheritance cannot transfer to a secondary line while a primary heir lives. That your claim is fraudulent and the rings are on my hands," Harry said. "They've been on my hands for 3 weeks. Merlin's seal doesn't sit on a fraudulent claimant." He held up his right hand. The Merlin ring's deep bronze light was visible in the morning, steady, unhurried, genuinely incandescent. "You can feel it from there." "I know you can." Voldemort was still. The red eyes were on the ring. "Yes," Voldemort said, very quietly. "The argument you've come to make," Harry said, "is a legal argument. And you're right that under one reading of the inheritance law, a primary heir, under any reading, under one reading," Harry repeated, calmly, "the primary line should supersede. But the ancient protocols have a mechanism for contested claims between lines." He looked at Voldemort steadily. "The mechanism is this: the Merlin seat decides." Silence. "The Merlin seat," Voldemort said, "is vacant." "No," Harry said. "It's not." He sat in Godric Gryffindor's chair, which had been carried here from the Wizengamot chamber. Hermione had arranged it, because Hermione arranged things, and placed at the head of the cleared floor. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He just sat down, and the moment he did, the quality of the magic in the room changed in a way that everyone present could feel and none of them could have described precisely. The Merlin ring's light expanded outward, not as a beam or a display, but as an atmosphere, a slow brightening of the air itself, as if something had turned a dial. The Hogwarts ceiling above them shifted. The silver-gray of the enchanted sky changed, deepening briefly to the blue-black of deep night before resolving into something else entirely, a color without a name, ancient and genuinely vast, that made the hall feel like an antechamber to something much larger. Augusta Longbottom, against the wall, made a sound that was entirely involuntary. Voldemort looked at the ceiling. At the light. At Harry in the seat. And for the first time in Harry's entire acquaintance with the man, something crossed his face that was not contempt, not calculation, not the superior assurance of someone who believed themselves beyond consequence. What crossed Voldemort's face was recognition. "The seat rules on contested claims," Harry said, from the chair, in a voice that was still his own, still Harry, still 17, still the boy from Privet Drive, but had something layered beneath it that hadn't been there before, or that had always been there and had only now fully arrived. "The Slytherin inheritance belongs to me under the secondary line, validated by Merlin's authority, which supersedes primary line claims when the primary heir has engaged in actions that violate the foundational purposes of the house. He let that land. Salazar Slytherin founded his house on the principle of magical excellence and the preservation of wizarding kind. He was many things and some of them were terrible, but he was not, he was never, trying to destroy the world he lived in. He built it." Harry looked at Voldemort. "You've been trying to unmake it. That's not Slytherin's legacy. That's a corruption of it. And the inheritance law recognizes corruption." Voldemort was very still. "You've looked this up," he said. "Hermione looked it up," Harry said. "Which is functionally the same thing." From her position against the wall, Hermione made a small, private sound that was not quite a laugh. "The argument is compelling," Voldemort said carefully. "In its way." The red eyes were entirely focused now. "But you're forgetting something." "What?" "The legal argument," Voldemort said, and his wand was in his hand so fast that several people shouted and the room's magic spiked, was the distraction. The first spell was Killing Curse Green, aimed not at Harry but at the chair, at the Merlin seat itself, a target that told Harry in 1 second that Voldemort had come prepared to argue, fail to argue, and then attempt to simply destroy the source of authority rather than be subject to it. Harry moved. Not with a counter-curse, with displacement, the lateral apparition that the rings had made dramatically more responsive, so that he was out of the chair and 6 feet to the left between one breath and the next, and the killing curse hit the stone chair and hit the Merlin seal enchantment and did something none of them had ever seen a killing curse do before. It bounced. Not back at Voldemort, sideways, absorbed and redirected by the ancient magic in the stone, converting to a burst of that bronze dark light that scattered across the ceiling like stars. The chair was unharmed. The hall was unharmed. The magic had simply declined to be destroyed. Voldemort looked at his own spell's light on the ceiling. Then he looked at Harry. "Interesting," he said. And then the actual fight began. It was not like their previous encounters, which had always had a quality of desperation about them, Harry running, surviving, buying time. This was different. This was Voldemort using the full extent of his extraordinary magical ability, and it was extraordinary. Harry never let himself forget that. The man was genuinely one of the most powerful wizards who had ever lived, and Harry meeting it with something that wasn't the same as power but was related to it the way a river is related to rain. Voldemort cast in precise, complex chains, curse into transfiguration into curse, the intermediate step forcing a response before the end of the sequence. Harry deflected the first, let the transfiguration do nothing because transfiguring air was strategically useless, and caught the end curse on a shield that he'd been building for 3 weeks and which held without any perceivable effort whatsoever. The shield held. Not straining. Not cracking at the edges. Just, held, the way a wall holds, because that was what it was. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. "You've been practicing," he said. "I've been learning," Harry said. There was a distinction. Practicing was repetition. Learning was understanding what the repetition was for. The next sequence was more complex, a dark casting structure Harry recognized from Hermione's briefings as something from the 14th century, a form so old that most modern wizards didn't know it existed. Harry had read about it 3 days ago precisely because Hermione had flagged it as something Voldemort might use if he came at full power. He let it partially complete, let 2/3 of it land against his shields, absorbing the pattern, and then turned the absorbed structure back through the Gryffindor ring, which transmuted it from dark to neutral and expelled it upward into the ceiling where it dissolved harmlessly. This time Voldemort stopped moving entirely. He looked at Harry with an expression that was the expression of a chess player who has just watched their opponent do something that shouldn't be possible within the rules of the game and who is revising their entire model of the board. "How?" Voldemort said. "The ring transmutes," Harry said. "It's what Gryffindor magic does with dark structures. It's always done that. Nobody's been using it at lordship level for 400 years, so nobody noticed." "That's not in any text," Voldemort said. "No," Harry agreed. "It's a practical discovery." Voldemort was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was not the cold theatrical laugh Harry had heard before. It was something more genuine, the laugh of a person encountering something genuinely surprising. "You've been delightful," Voldemort said, and the word was entirely sincerely meant in the way that a predator finds its prey delightful when the prey is worth the hunt. "Truly. I have underestimated you for 16 years and each time I correct my assessment, you exceed it." "I'm going to finish this now," Harry said. Voldemort raised his wand. Harry didn't raise his. He reached through all 3 rings simultaneously. It was not a spell. There was no incantation, no wand motion, no defined magical act in any grimoire. It was the thing he had been working toward since the morning in the Gringotts chamber when he'd first felt the rings settle onto his fingers and the world had rearranged itself quietly around him. 3 magical inheritances, 3 different ancient structures, each one representing something foundational about what magic in Britain was and could be: courage, complexity, transcendence, and he let them converge. The convergence had a sound. Not a loud one. A deep one. The sound a very large bell makes if you're standing too close to it, felt in the chest before it arrives at the ears. The bronze light of Merlin's ring expanded again but differently this time, not as an atmosphere but as something structural, filling the hall's geometry, following the lines of the building's ancient magic the way water follows the shape of a riverbed. Hogwarts joined it. That was the only way to describe what happened. The castle's own accumulated magic, centuries of it, layered into every stone, joined the convergence the way a tributary joins a river. Not directed by Harry, not commanded. Just, joining, because the Merlin authority was what it was, and the castle recognized it, and had been waiting, possibly since it was built, for exactly this. Voldemort cast 3 rapid curses, all different, all complex, all aimed with the precision of someone who had spent 70 years mastering magical combat. They hit the convergent field and were, not reflected, not absorbed. They were transformed. Unraveled back to their component parts, their intent extracted and dissipated, the raw magic returning to the ambient field neutral and harmless, like taking a sentence apart until it's just letters. Voldemort stopped casting. He looked at what was happening around him. The light. The castle's participation. The quality of Harry standing in it, not straining, not performing, just present, just himself, just the person he had always been with everything he'd always had finally acknowledged and active. "You can't win this," Harry said. Not cruelly. Not triumphantly. Just as a fact he was offering to someone who was intelligent enough to process it if they chose to. Not here. Not against all 3 houses combined, not with Hogwarts aligned, not against the Merlin authority ruling the claim valid. Voldemort looked at him. The red eyes were, Harry searched for the right description, they were reading something. Working through a complex calculation that had many variables and was arriving at a conclusion that changed everything it was connected to. "The Horcruxes," Voldemort said. "Are dealt with," Harry said. The calculation in Voldemort's eyes became something else. When, he said. Hermione started on them 48 hours ago, Harry said. When I came back from my meeting with Bellatrix. The name landed like a stone in still water. Voldemort's reaction was minute and total, a stillness that was not his usual stillness, not the controlled quiet of a powerful man choosing not to react, but the genuine, physical stillness of someone who has just had their foundation removed. She told you, Voldemort said. She chose something she loved over something she served, Harry said. That's not betrayal. That's just someone finally being honest. Voldemort was quiet for a long moment. The light in the hall continued its slow, steady work. The castle breathed. Outside, through the impossible ceiling, whatever weather was actually occurring above Scotland had resolved itself into a pale winter sun that had no right to be that warm this time of year but was anyway. I cannot die, Voldemort said. It came out differently from every other time Harry had heard him say it, not as a statement of power, not as a boast or a threat. It came out almost like a question. Like a man who had organized his entire existence around a fact and was, for the first time, genuinely unsure. Tom, Harry said, and used the name not as a taunt this time but as the thing it actually was, the name of a specific person, a real person who had made choices and could, theoretically, have made different ones. The Horcruxes are gone. Voldemort's hand, holding his wand, was very still. You're not invincible anymore, Harry said. You're just a man. A very powerful one, with a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill and, he stopped. He looked at Voldemort, really looked, past the horror of what the man had made of himself, past every death and every cruelty, at the ancient calculation that had produced this particular monster, a boy who had decided the only safety was power and the only power was permanence and had spent 70 years being catastrophically wrong about both. You're just a man, Harry said again, more quietly. And you're tired. The red eyes looked at him. You don't know anything about what I am, Voldemort said, but the words lacked their usual temperature. I know you built all of this, Harry said, gesturing at the light, the castle, the cleared hall, the witnesses along the walls, to never die. And now you're standing in it and the thing you built it to prevent is the only thing in front of you. He paused. I'm not going to torture you. I'm not going to make a spectacle of this. But I need you to understand that it's over. Voldemort looked at him for the last time with the full weight of whatever he had been, once, before 70 years of bad choices and worse magic had made him something that barely fit inside its own skin. There was a moment, genuinely just a moment, so brief Harry almost missed it, where something moved behind the red eyes that was old and buried and had not been near the surface in decades. Then he raised his wand, and Harry raised his. It ended without thunder. That surprised everyone, Harry thought, afterward. Everyone had expected the climax of Tom Riddle's war to be spectacular, dramatic in the way that death had always been spectacular around him, the way his entire existence had been spectacular, enormous and loud and impossible to look away from. Instead it ended with two wands pointed at each other in a hall full of morning light, and the Merlin seal burning on Harry's finger, and the connection that formed between their wands, not because Harry forced it, but because the magic between them had always known it was going to arrive here, had been building toward it since the night in Godric's Hollow when it had first been interrupted, and the slow, absolute dissolution that moved through Voldemort's magic like the tide going out. Not killed, not destroyed. Unmade, in the specific sense of the Merlin authority ruling that what he had become could not hold its shape against the foundational magic of the world he had spent his life trying to break. Tom Riddle crumpled without sound. What remained on the floor of the great hall was a man, just a man, small and thin and white-haired and somehow very old, the constructed monstrous form gone, the compounded magic of 7 decades of dark work gone with the Horcrux's destruction, and what was left was something so ordinary and so diminished that several of the Wizengamot observers looked away. Harry stood over him. He was breathing. Barely. The eyes that looked up at him were dark now, human dark, the red gone, just the eyes of a very old man at the bottom of everything he'd chosen. Don't, Tom Riddle said. The voice was just a voice now. I'm not going to kill you, Harry said. I wasn't going to kill you. I told you that. A pause. Why? Because killing you proves your point, Harry said. That power is the only thing. That the only way to be safe is to eliminate your threats. He crouched down so they were on a level. You go to Azkaban. You face the Wizengamot. You are tried by the people you tried to destroy. He paused. That's not mercy. That's making you face what you did. It's what Neville asked for, and it's the right answer. Tom Riddle looked up at him from the floor of Hogwarts and said nothing. In his eyes was something Harry couldn't name and didn't try to, something very old and very alone that had probably been there since a boy in an orphanage had first decided that love was a weakness worth cutting out. Harry stood. He turned to Amelia Bones. He's yours, Harry said. The aftermath was not tidy. The aftermath was never tidy. The Wizengamot convened 3 times in the following 2 weeks. Harry attended all 3 sessions, sat in his 3 seats, and spent most of his time trying to ensure that the speed of change didn't outpace the infrastructure of whatever was going to come next. Scrimgeour surprised him, twice, by making decisions that prioritized stability over politics, which Harry chose to note as a positive sign while remaining entirely unsentimental about the man's motives. The blood status laws were formally repealed. All of them. The full sweep, the accumulated legislative cruelty of 3 generations, struck from the record in a session that lasted 4 hours and that Harry spent watching from the lordship seats with Ron on one side of him and Neville on the other, and Hermione in the observer's gallery writing 17 pages of notes that were later published as a 2-part essay in the Daily Prophet under the headline What the Law Should Have Always Been. Lucius Malfoy stood trial for the 1992 Hogwarts attack. Harry testified. Lucius's solicitors were formidably prepared and fought every point with the skill of people who had spent 40 years protecting a man who needed a lot of protecting. The Wizengamot sentenced Lucius to 5 years house arrest, full financial penalties, and a permanent removal from any political office. It was not enough, by some measures. It was more than nothing, and nothing was what Lucius had received before. Harry watched the verdict delivered and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that was incomplete but was moving. Narcissa, at Lucius's side throughout, caught Harry's eye once as they were leaving the chamber. She nodded. He returned it. The Lestrange brothers' trial was more complex and less satisfying and took 2 months and resulted in sentences that several people argued were too lenient and several others argued were too severe, which Harry had been told was generally what justice looked like when it was actually working. Bellatrix did not stand trial. Her cooperation in the Horcrux matter, documented and submitted under Harry's lordship authority, combined with the terms of the immunity agreement, placed her outside the trial structure for a period of 3 years. This was the most politically contentious decision Harry made, and he made it knowing that, and he stood behind it in 3 separate Wizengamot sessions while people he respected argued passionately against it. What he told the Wizengamot, in the session that settled the matter, she made a choice that changed the outcome of this war. I know what she's done. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm asking you to acknowledge that people can choose differently, because if we don't acknowledge that, we're building the next war right now. Neville voted in favor of the immunity. Harry asked him about it afterward, privately, because he had to. She hasn't faced my parents yet, Neville said. His voice was even and his expression was the expression of someone who has done a large amount of internal work in a short period of time. The immunity doesn't cover that. She's going to sit across from Frank and Alice Longbottom in whatever state they're in, and she's going to say whatever you make people say in that situation, and she's going to have to keep living after. He paused. I think that's harder than Azkaban. I think she knows it's harder. He looked at Harry. I'm not forgiving her. I'm not letting what she did make me into someone who needs her to suffer more than she's already going to. Harry looked at his friend, at Neville Longbottom, who had grown from a boy who broke cauldrons and lost his toad into someone who could make a statement like that with full understanding of what it cost, and thought that whatever happened next, whatever the rings meant and whatever the lordships built, this was the part that actually mattered. This right here. People doing the hard thing. Augusta would be proud, Harry said. Augusta cried for the first time in my memory when the verdict came down, Neville said. But if you tell anyone I told you that, I will deny it to my actual grave. Draco came to Hogwarts in September. He arrived by the regular Hogwarts Express like everyone else, which Harry had suggested and which Draco had apparently found equal parts mortifying and appropriate. He wore no house insignia for the first 2 weeks, which caused a great deal of speculation among the other students, and then one morning appeared at breakfast wearing Slytherin green with the quiet determination of someone who has decided that a thing is what it is and reclaiming it is better than abandoning it. He was not popular, because some things don't change overnight and some of them shouldn't. But he was present, and he was working hard in his classes, and in potions, which was still Slughorn's domain now that Snape was gone, Snape whose story had come out in full during the trials and whose memory Harry had placed a formal lordship commendation on the record for, because truth mattered even when it was complicated. In potions, Draco was extraordinary in a way that even people who hated him found difficult to argue with. Harry saw him in the library one evening in October, surrounded by healing texts, and didn't interrupt. Just saw, and noted, and moved on. The Merlin ring had quieted. Not gone, it was always warm, always present, always that steady pulse that Harry had learned to carry the way you carry a key. It didn't demand attention, it just existed. The Gryffindor ring and the Slytherin ring had settled too, both of them doing whatever they'd always done. The ambient magic of his casting was different, richer, more articulate than it had been before, but not obtrusive. Just his. He went back to Gryffindor Tower, which was his property now in the technical sense that no one had quite worked out how to handle yet, and which was also, in every sense that actually mattered, just home. He found Hermione in the common room late one evening in November, after everyone else had gone to bed, sitting by the fire with a cup of tea and a book she wasn't reading. He sat across from her, and for a while neither of them said anything, which was comfortable in the way that only very old friendship makes things comfortable. "Do you think it'll hold?" she said finally. Not looking up from the book she wasn't reading. "The piece?" Harry said. "All of it. The legal changes, the Wizengamot reforms, the culture of it. The way people are treating each other." She paused. "It feels fragile." "It is fragile," Harry said. "Every new thing is fragile. That's not the same as breakable." Hermione looked up at him. "That's a surprisingly wise thing to say." "I'm surprisingly wise sometimes. I hide it well." She made a sound that was half laugh, half exasperation, which was her most common sound around him and one he found genuinely comforting. Then she said, more quietly, "Are you happy?" Harry thought about it. Actually thought about it, the way the question deserved. "Yeah," he said. Not with the hollowness of someone performing contentment. With the solidity of someone who has survived enough to know the difference. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good," she said. "Are you?" She looked at the fire. Outside the tower windows, November snow was starting, the first of the year, coming sideways in the wind off the grounds and settling on the windowsills in soft uneven lines. "Getting there," she said, which was honest, and was also the best possible answer. Ron arrived 10 minutes later from his dormitory, apparently unable to sleep, dropped into the third chair by the fire with the ease of someone who has been doing this for years and intends to keep doing it indefinitely. "What are we talking about?" he asked. "Whether it'll hold," Hermione said. "Course it'll hold," Ron said, without any apparent doubt. "We built it. We don't build things that fall over." Hermione looked at him. "That is an empirically very questionable statement given your track record with, metaphorically speaking," Ron said. "Metaphorically. I'm being metaphorical." Harry sat with his two best friends by the Gryffindor fire and listened to them argue about the definition of metaphor and felt the 3 rings warm on his fingers and thought about Sirius, about his parents, about all the people who had been the foundation of this moment without living to stand in it. He thought about a great hall older than Hogwarts, and a figure at the head of a table, and a hand raised in what might have been greeting. He thought about what it meant to inherit something. Not just the legal weight of it, not the seats and the grants and the authority. The actual thing, the line of people going back through history who had made choices and passed their consequences forward, whose blood had run through his veins his whole life without his knowing it, who had loved and fought and built and failed and built again. He reached up and touched the Merlin ring. That deep, slow pulse. He'd told the Wizengamot, months ago, "I want to build something after this." He'd meant it as a declaration of intention. He was beginning to understand it as something larger. Building wasn't a project with an end date. It was a practice. An ongoing, daily, expensive, worthwhile thing that required the people around you and the willingness to be wrong and the particular kind of strength that didn't come from power but from choosing to show up, every day, regardless. He looked at the fire and at his friends and at the snow on the windows and the warm stones of the tower. He was Harry Potter. Lord of 3 ancient houses, heir to 3 bloodlines that contained more history than he could hold, holder of authority that predated every current institution in the wizarding world. He was also 17 years old and sitting by the fire with his friends at the end of a very long year, and outside the snow was settling on Hogwarts the way it had settled for 1,000 years, the way it would settle for 1,000 more. The rings pulsed, warm and steady and quietly certain. He was exactly where he was supposed to be,